Since neither can stay healthy and they're both lefties, can't we just fuse Tua and Michael Penix together and end up with the healthiest, most mid quarterback of all time? Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 24 team in my preseason power rankings. As today, we take a deep dive into the Atlanta Falcons. I do want to say, with the 24th ranking here, that does make for the quarter mark of this series. It has been a phenomenal ride so far to this point. I want to thank all of you guys for helping make this the best deep dive series to date. And with that, if you guys could please keep it up by hitting that like button down below. It's a free and easy little thing that really does go a long way towards continuing to support this series and this channel. And of course, if you enjoy the video today, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the rest of these deep dives as we lead up to the number one team in my power rankings. But we've got the Falcons here. Yet another transition season for the Falcons. They are certainly a team, I would say at this point, that are in purgatory, and they're trying to find their way out one way or another. So we'll talk about what some of those pathways might be, whether it's in a good way, things going right, and maybe this team can be the team that wins the NFC South this year, or maybe there's some areas for this team where things could go wrong, and maybe next year in a better quarterback class, we're talking about a bright future in Atlanta. There's different ways this season could go. They're a fun and interesting team. So let's go ahead and get started. As we do in this series, we go through every aspect of the team through the roster and begin with the coaching staff. And with each of those segments, we take a look at their offseason changes and ask the big question, did they get better, worse, or maybe stay the same at that spot? And with the coaching staff in Atlanta, there's a new regime here with Kevin Stefanski coming in and really bringing a lot of his guys with him from Cleveland, not just Tommy Rees, who will be the offensive coordinator by name, though Kevin Stefanski is the overseer of this offense. But a lot of his assistants as well. This is really Cleveland South, for better or worse. But one of those big name position coaches coming down is going to be Bill Callahan, who, I mean, at this point, he's a legend, of course, one of the bigger name offensive line coaches in the league. At least need to mention, like, he has not done a good job with the Titans offensive line last year when he followed his son over to Tennessee. Wasn't doing a good job in Cleveland the last few years either, as he's getting up there in age. So I got my eyes on the job Bill Callahan can do with this offensive line. And then they also changed special teams coordinators as well. Craig Aukerman kind of getting identified as the guy they wanted to go with from Miami, who underwent some obvious major staff changes themselves, and he was not retained there. But those are your core additions to this coaching staff. We will obviously break down Kevin Stefanski here and everything he brings to the table. But as far as the losses, so to speak, for the Falcons coaching staff, it's nothing I'm really worried about. Raheem Morris, I think, finally started to show some of his defensive prowess in tandem with Jeff Ulbrich, who you'll notice I didn't list a defensive coordinator addition for the Falcons. Jeff Ulbrich will overtake this defense, just kind of passing the keys to him in many ways. Ultimately, I think Raheem Morris made a case to stick around here, but didn't do quite enough to save his job with a late season surge last year. And they make the decision to part ways. And I have some thoughts on Kevin Stefanski, but I do look at Stefanski as a more proven, better coach than what Raheem Morris had proved to this point. So I do look at it as an upgrade at head coach. They lose Zach Robinson, who was calling plays for them last year. They obviously change offensive line and special teams coaches there as well, with Dwayne Ledford and Marquise Williams, respectively. But as far as the big question, did they get better with their staff? I do say yes. I think this is a slightly upgraded staff. Many people out there will say this is a tremendous upgrade because Kevin Stefanski is a very big name coach. He is infamously a two-time Coach of the Year winner. And that right there kind of gets me in some trouble because I think those that really watch this channel if you asked them, does TFG like Kevin Stefanski, they'd probably say no, because I have really pointed out how fraudulent, especially that second Coach of the Year award was for Kevin Stefanski. It was basically given to him because Jim Schwartz did an incredible job with that defense that won them a bunch of games. And yeah, they had Joe Flacco just throw a bunch of YOLO balls that year and ended up with some fun drives that helped them win some games and get into the playoffs. Kevin Stefanski was not the best head coach in the league that year. He was probably not top half in the league in terms of best head coaches. In fact, I think Kevin Stefanski, who's known as an offensive guru after spending so much time under a bunch of different coaches in Minnesota and then going to Cleveland and, yes, having some really good success early, I would say the last 2 years in Cleveland, it wasn't just bad under Kevin Stefanski. It was like, what the hell is going on here? And it transcended the excuse of, well, we don't have a quarterback. And yes, of course that matters. And yes, I'm fascinated to see him hopefully get a higher level of quarterback play here in Atlanta between Michael Penix and Tua Tagovailoa. But it was to the point of like, they couldn't get anything going. They couldn't establish a single schematic wrinkle that really was working for that offense. The Cleveland Browns offense has been unwatchable, dysfunctional, and it reaches a point where like, okay, yeah, if Kevin Stefanski is a 2-time Coach of the Year, offensive guru type of guy, at some point it can't look like that, you know? Like, okay, you can have your struggles, but you should at least do some things that you can point to and be like, oh, well, Kevin Stefanski's elevating the offense, whether it's through play action or a creative run game or doing something to help these poor quarterbacks there. There was none of that. And every single, turn they made at quarterback, whether it was, yes, Deshaun Watson and all of that mess, but Dylan Gabriel, Shedeur, Joe Flacco played so much better when he went to Cincinnati within the same season. Having been in Cleveland. Look, I said I think most people would say that if you watch this channel, you would think I don't like Kevin Stefanski. I do. I'm pulling for him. And I think if you wind back the clock about 3 years ago, there's some stuff to like. And I'll talk about some of the stuff that he theoretically brings to the table and does well here. But I can't ignore the last 2 years. And I am skeptical that he is someone that really deserved like an immediate head coach position, essentially. I really felt like Stefanski probably needed to go back to wherever it was going to be, maybe Detroit or the Chargers or, one of those situations, call plays again, remind us that he's good at this, and then get that head coach opportunity. It's not that that guy can't still be in there. It's just, it's risky at this point with Kevin Stefanski, I think. So I don't hate the guy. I'm pulling for him. And a part of my gut tells me that this is actually going to work out. But my eyes are still bleeding from watching the last 2 years of his offense in Cleveland. As far as his rankings are concerned, though, there is still some of that respect baked in, especially when it comes to the offensive coach rankings. They're certainly not bad here. For pass game coaching, they do still rank 16th to 23rd here for the Falcons. And run game coaching, that is where I'm still giving Kevin Stefanski a lot of benefit of the doubt. 7th to 13th for run game coaching. And I do have him as the 26th ranked head coach as we head into the season. But that really takes me to the schematic conversation on what a Kevin Stefanski offense looks like. And that very respectable run game coach grade there is where I want to start, because I do think when you talk about when Kevin Stefanski was doing really good things in Cleveland with Nick Chubb and a highly respected offensive line and Baker Mayfield at the time, and even 1 year of Jacoby Brissett there, Stefanski, I do think, was a bit of a pathfinder or a trailblazer, if you will, in terms of showing the way for some of these Shanahan-style coaches to really expand the core idea of all of these Shanahan offenses that about 2/3 of the league runs is wide zone, heavy personnel, and marrying those wide zone looks with your play action game, the idea of make the run look like the pass. And that is all a core part of Kevin Stefanski's offense that he really took on later in his time in Minnesota after starting in some more pro style, more traditional types of offenses under guys like maybe Brad Childress, Bill Musgrave, Norv Turner. But it was kind of that Gary Kubiak influence at the time where Stefanski was really like, no, we're going to really lean into play action under center, Shanahan style concepts. But what we saw in Cleveland was an evolution of that outside zone focused run game. And those really good Browns offenses, Kevin Stefanski rightfully got a lot of praise because, yes, they ran outside zone, but they really heavily leaned into gap stuff as well. A heavy emphasis on the duo run game, which is much more of a north and south mashing type of run game. And then also just getting really creative with his guards at the time with Joel Bitonio, but especially Wyatt Teller had career years going back to 2020, 2021, especially. Wyatt Teller was an all-pro because of how Kevin Stefanski was able to weaponize a guy like that that's just a nasty weapon of a run blocker on pulls and power runs and sweeps and just getting more creative with pulling linemen, which you don't typically affiliate with that outside zone mentality. And it wasn't just in Cleveland. Around that time, we saw Sean McVay reload his run game really in the vision of that Browns run game, getting bigger in between the tackles and running more duo and gap power stuff. Kyle Shanahan around this time adapted a lot of this stuff. Like I said, Kevin Stefanski at the peak of his powers as a head coach with a Nick Chubb, with weapons on the offensive line, did show to be an excellent trailblazer in the run game and expanded the minds of a lot of these Shanahan-style coaches. I would say Matt LaFleur picked a lot of that and put into his run game as well. And I'll stay optimistic on that front, man. I do think if Kevin Stefanski brings nothing else to the table, I still am willing to give him a lot of credit for being an excellent designer of the run game. And I can kind of understand why he looked at Atlanta and was like, I really want that job with Bijan and Chris Lindstrom. I can only imagine he is excited to hopefully get back to a lot of that stuff and having one of the more prolific run games in the league. So there you go. I said something very positive about Kevin Stefanski. As far as the pass game coaching side of things with him is concerned, though, that's where I have some more questions. Again, it ranks a good bit lower there, 16th to 23rd, still very solid, respectable. And we've seen Stefanski at times, I think, was that the 2023 season with Jacoby Brissett? He did a good job with Baker Mayfield coming in. Generally speaking, when he's had adequate quarterback play, he's brought a lot of that Shanahan play action mentality where he's able to scheme up open looks, marry the run and pass, and have a normal looking passing game in certain spots. I guess one thing that is really important to mention with Kevin Stefanski, just from a scheme point of view with the passing game, very 12 personnel, heavy personnel focused when he's doing what he wants to do. And you look at the construction of this Falcons team, I very much anticipate that's going to apply here. The Browns last year, for example, ran the most 12 personnel in the league, which is 2 tight ends and a running back being the 1 and the 2. When you talk about personnel, just for the people that don't know and like to learn stuff from this series, when we mention personnel being 11 or 12 or 13 or whatever it is, the first digit is the amount of backs. The second digit is the amount of tight ends. And then it's assumed that everybody else is a wide receiver. But with Stefanski, yes, a lot of 12 personnel, 13 personnel, even not afraid to get into it, which is something Falcons fans have been very familiar with Arthur Smith. I mean, they're very much from that same philosophy. But it is definitely notable, number one, the fact that this team signed Austin Hooper, who Stefanski's familiar with, has worked with him before, to be your traditional, and Falcons fans are familiar with him too. He started in Atlanta, but him being that like inline, dirty work tight end. So that allows you to look at Kyle Pitts like Stefanski did with Harold Fannin last year and make it so that Kyle Pitts doesn't have to be a tight end. He can do it, if it's 3rd and 8 and the blocking aspect of it doesn't really matter, and you lining them up next to your tackle makes them a better mismatch problem, that's great. But that's largely the only time you're going to see Kyle Pitts actually playing tight end. In most of your early down offense, it's going to be off the wing, from the slot, even as just the other wide receiver here, if he wants to get really blocking focused and lean into Charlie Warner on this team as well. When things are working in a Stefanski offense, that is a core part of it. And again, that's not unfamiliar territory for Falcons fans, but I do think Stefanski has that vision, and I would say adding Austin Hooper into the mix just furthers their ability to do that and get the most out of Kyle Pitts, hopefully, within Stefanski's scheme. But yeah, there's been a lot of bad there as well. I don't know just how broad his horizons are, how creative he can be to cater to different quarterback skill sets and adjust their passing game necessarily. Again, those have been my core questions in Cleveland. So it's not horrible respect there with the ranking on their pass game coaching, but I think much more to prove in that sense here coming down to Atlanta. So there's your Kevin Stefanski analysis. I think it's a reasonable hire, not my favorite of this hiring cycle. One of those things where okay, my eyes and my brain from the last 2 years tell me this was a little bit of a reach of a hire, but kind of my heart and my gut still likes Kevin Stefanski, and I could definitely see a path where this works out and he gets things right back on track. I don't really have a lot of notes on Tommy Rees. He's very new to coaching. Kevin Stefanski obviously likes him. I would just say if things do go well here, Rees very much would be, someone that's in that archetype of the former, kind of recent quarterback that's come up under a Shanahan style offense that starts to climb those names. But we're probably a good bit removed from saying that on Tommy Rees currently. But let's talk about the defensive coaching here. And they are retaining Jeff Ulbrich and keeping things going with what was, depending on who you listen to, kind of a quietly good year for the Falcons defense, given what they had to work with. This was pretty definitively, heading into the year, on paper, one of the worst rosters in the entire league on defense. And they actually ended the season 12th in defensive DVOA, 11th for their pass defense, 23rd for their run defense. And I think there's a little bit of what we just talked about in the Saints deep dive. This division had a very favorable schedule. They didn't play the best offenses all the time, and that's going to help your defensive metrics. Also, according to DVOA, they had the 23rd easiest schedule. And just by the eye test, I wouldn't say Atlanta had consistently throughout the course of the season the 12th best defense. But was it 18th, 15th, very solid defense? Absolutely, last year. And by far what comes to my mind is how remarkable they were at leveraging athletes along their front and manufacturing a pass rush, because they don't have pass rushers in Atlanta. They don't. They drafted a couple of them last year. We're going to talk about Jalen Walker, James Pierce. Those guys had some pretty good moments at times last year. At large, they weren't dominating one-on-one reps. And again, we'll get into it there. But the fact that this was actually a pass rush that teams had a hard time figuring out and blocking up is an absolute testament to the combination, I think, of Jeff Ulbrich and Raheem Morris. And I think we've seen both of those coaches in charge of their own defenses do this with stunts and creative blitz looks to really use the scheme, and athletes specifically with athletic edge rushers and undersized athletic interior D linemen, which is exactly how this front is built. That's how the Rams front was built under Raheem Morris's defense. That's how the Jets defense was built under Jeff Ulbrich. It was a really nice meeting of the minds there, where teams couldn't figure out where these guys were coming from and their loops and stunts and games, and also being one of the most blitz-heavy teams in the league last year. The Falcons were 3rd in blitz rate last year, and first in blitz rate on third and fourth down. So look, these guys were getting after it last year, and it led to really good results for their pass defense, certainly exceeding what they should have been capable of on paper. And credit for that is shown here, as that same B grade that we gave to Stefanski for the run game coaching is applied to the Falcons pass defense coaching, where they rank 10th to 17th, bordering on top 10 in a cluster of really good pass game designers, but technically bordering on top 10. Like, I was impressed by their pass defense coaching last year. I think if there's any question there, it's just how much was Raheem Morris putting this stuff in and install and stuff, and how much of it was Jeff Ulbrich. I think there's still some to prove there that Jeff Ulbrich was the prominent mind or can carry over all the stuff that they did last year, but I'm relatively confident that he can. Now, you're going to get some more questions with the run defense. Even just like naturally, if that's how they want to build their fronts, this is probably the lightest front six, front seven in the NFL. We'll see that when we get to the D-line segment. So it's almost by choice that this is more of a pass game oriented scheme and coaching staff here. But in terms of results as well, you know, they were much better. Like I said, 11th in pass defense, 23rd in run defense DVOA last year. The Jets run defense under Jeff Ulbrich specifically as well, where he most recently came from, really struggled to an eye-opening extent. So I do think, you know, that side of things matters. It's great that they can get after it on third down, and like that really helps. But if they could get to third down a little more often and not get gashed against the run, that would be nice as well. So they do rank in that bottom tier for run defense coaching, still C+ grade. You know, I've said this in several deep dives. Like, I don't think there is a bad defensive coach left in the NFL as a defensive coordinator. Some are better than others. Some have more to prove. Jeff Ulbrich has more to prove from a run defense standpoint. But I think you kind of get a general idea of this scheme already, just kind of what we've talked about being a very light athletic front that really blitzes a lot, runs a lot of stunts, tries to outgame you, tries to out-athlete you. I do want to talk a little bit more about like their coverage structures on the back end, because their secondary is also a big part of their success last year, and how they could be good on defense this year if they're going to be good. And the ball knowers out there are going to just assume like, okay, they blitzed a ton. So obviously they ran a lot of cover 3 and cover 1, because most of your 5-man rushes are going to result in those types of cover structures where you're either just manning up, rushing 5, that gets recorded as a blitz, unless you're 0 blitzing and rushing 6. But the Falcons were 29th in 0 blitz percentage, so they almost exclusively blitzed 5 players. Only 2.7% of their entire defensive calls were cover 0. So yes, if you're blitzing 5, unless you're getting really crazy, like Brian Flores or Steve Spagnuolo, you're typically going to be running cover 3 or cover 1 on the back end. And that is reflected. The Falcons ran the 10th most cover 1, the 4th most cover 3. And then on earlier downs when they weren't blitzing quite as much, or if they decided not to blitz, they ran a lot of cover 4. They were 2nd in cover 4. So this was kind of a min-maxed approach on defense. Again, the 4th most cover 3 in the league, the 2nd most cover 4 in the league, and running the 10th most cover 1, and they pretty much didn't run anything else. Probably the least evenly distributed coverage map, if you will, for a defense. But they know what they like to do. And at least from a coverage standpoint, they made it work last year, but that's kind of what it's going to look like here in Atlanta, I would assume, because things worked from a pass defense standpoint and just the way that this front is constructed. It's still very light, and appears to me that Jeff Ulbrich is going to continue running this kind of 3-4 post-snap, single high, blitz heavy defense that was very much Raheem Morris's thing. That's why it got a little murky when Falcons fans got mad at me when I said it's Raheem Morris's defense and not Jeff Ulbricht's defense, because yes, Jeff Ulbricht kind of had his hands on the defense and had his finger on the trigger, but this isn't Jeff Ulbricht's scheme, right? This is Raheem Morris's scheme that we've described that he brought over from the Rams. Jeff Ulbricht ran it. Jeff Ulbricht comes from the Robert Saleh, don't blitz a lot, 4-man front, like very different scheme. If you listened to the Titans deep dive, like very different, other than the concept of having a lighter interior D-line and running a lot of stunts. Like he's familiar with that, certainly. But I can really only assume that Jeff Ulbricht is going to continue what they did in Atlanta last year because they retained him. That to me says they liked what they saw. They want Jeff Ulbricht to do that instead of like, no, we're going to retain you and then ask you to do something entirely different from what you've done in other regimes. Just very much feels like if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach from Stefanski coming in here. But technically speaking, Jeff Ulbricht could go more back to his roots. So something to keep an eye on for sure. But again, I fully expect that kind of Raheem Morris style defense here in Atlanta to be continued. And there is your Falcons coaching staff. It is an interesting combination of kind of veteran coaches at this point between Stefanski and Jeff Ulbricht that have been pretty big names in the coaching world now for the better part of 8 years, coming into a team that's kind of in purgatory and hopefully can steer this thing back in the right direction and come together with a good vision for this team. I would just say this staff falls under cautious optimism for me for the Falcons. There's some staffs that I look at and I just kind of laugh and bet against. Whether I end up right or wrong about that is a different story, but that's not the case here. It's not my favorite staff in the world, but I can definitely see how this can work out as well. But next up, I'm excited to get into this Saints roster. But before that, another thing I'm really excited to get into here is the World Cup. And Prize Picks lineups are the perfect pairing to keep you more interested in these World Cup matches and give you a chance to win some big bucks as well. With Prize Picks lineups, you're selecting more or less on any number of player stats. So if we're talking World Cup, you're looking at shots, passes attempted, so many different things I'm trying to learn about this sport as I watch the World Cup, but very much enjoying having Prize Picks as a part of that. You can also pick the winner for these games now in most states, including California, Texas, and Florida. So that's another great way to enjoy these games, of course. It's not just the World Cup. They have baseball and just so many other different options. Basically anything you could think of, they're on Prize Picks. They even have a social media element. You can follow along with my picks if you want. I don't know that I would trust my opinion on World Cup picks, but certainly once we get to the NFL season, I'm going to be really loading into trying to find some winners with these NFL matchups. That's going to be at TFG_football in the social section on Prize Picks. So big thanks to Prize Picks for sponsoring today's deep dive. If you sign up, use code HMA, and when you do, they will give you $50 in bonus lineups when you play your first $5 there. So thank you, Prize Picks, and let's keep going with this deep dive. And let's now get into this very fascinating Falcons roster. And I would say the quarterback room is where the first area of fascination comes in with the Atlanta Falcons. Now, as far as offseason changes, they say goodbye to Kirk Cousins, who did play solid football for them down the stretch last year. You have to consider that a loss. They bring in Tua Tagovailoa. So I said neutral there. If it was a full season of Kirk Cousins last year that he played at that level, probably more of a downgrade. But as we'll talk about with Tua, reasonable enough signing for this team that could be okay for them. So has to be considered a decent enough addition for this team. I said neutral at quarterback, and let's just get into it. I teased it in the intro, but you have two quarterbacks at a fork in the roads moment in their careers, very different moments in their career. But both Tua Tagovailoa and Michael Penix, we don't know who the starter is necessarily going to be here. This is going to, I think, be a evolving story. And that just kind of opens up two different, it's like a choose your own adventure book for this Falcons season. So which adventure do we start with? I think I will start with Tua Tagovailoa because in my opinion, I do think he's probably the week one starter. And if you want to take an optimistic spin on this, I could see Tua playing pretty well on a Kevin Stefanski offense with the weapons on this team and holding on to this job for 17 games. I think that's one way this year goes. There's also the Tua gets hurt again, got like knock on wood, but he does have a history of concussions that needs to be a part of the dialogue with Tua. There is this perpetual fear that if he gets another one, that's going to have to be it. I mean, on the last concussion, we saw like Manti Te'o, who's, I think, family, like a cousin or a best friend of Tua, like crying on live TV, like basically saying, like, you got to do what you got to do, but man, I don't want to lose you, brother. Like, it's real. It's a real thing. And that's been a really sad part of Tua's NFL story so far. So it has to be mentioned that between that and a guy that has also just had other injuries as well, back issues and stuff, like he is one of the least durable quarterbacks in the NFL behind maybe Michael Penix. But that opens up a path where Tua's playing well and then he's not available to play, and then you have to go to Michael Penix. And then there's the path where Tua plays, and he plays like he played last year. And I've never been the biggest Tua guy, far from it. I would just say my Tua takes have very much aged well over the years, but he historically hasn't been as bad as he was last year with the Dolphins. He's at least a guy that you can point to and be like, all right, he is going to blindly trust the offense and make some of the most obnoxiously bad decisions, just giving the ball to linebackers because he didn't think they were going to be there pre-snap. And he has a noodle arm, and the range of your offense tends to be very limited. Like, yeah, when you have Tyreek Hill, like he can technically get it about 50 yards out there, which is about the bare minimum for a starting NFL quarterback. But like driving deep outs and actually pinning the ball on vertical threats, that's non-existent for Tua. There's obvious painful frustrations with him that severely limit his upside and always have. But at his best, he's a guy that in a good infrastructure, like he had in Miami, one of the best infrastructures, he will play on time. Yes, to a fault at times, but 95%, if not more, of those dropbacks are on time, well-placed throws, giving guys rack opportunities, running the offense like that sort of point guard, call it game manager, maybe even system quarterback type of guy. And then another thing I've definitely given Tua credit for over the years is he's a very good red zone quarterback. He's not the best play extender, an explosive guy in between the 20s to elevate the offense in terms of like improvisational skills and that kind of stuff. But in those tighter areas, he can be very patient in the red zone, use good pocket presence, buy time for those little opportunities. And you got like Kyle Pitts, Drake London here, like that could really matter. He's never really had those big-bodied red zone threats, so there is stuff to like about Tua, despite the fact that I've never been a big fan of him, and he's coming off a hilariously bad year. Like, I had fun joking about it, but it actually, like, legitimately made me money last year just taking Tua's interception number on your daily apps. Shout out Prize Picks, by the way. But it was a gimme that you were going to get a bad Tua mistake. And that's just like from a processing decision-making standpoint. He's had issues over the years, but it was worse last year than it's ever been. And that ultimately makes Tua quite the difficult player to rank right now. Not in the sense of like, oh yeah, he could be great here and, save his career and take the Falcons to the promised land. But in a like Daniel Jones kind of way from the Colts last year, that's probably the best case scenario. Daniel Jones as well, another guy that's had a bunch of injury stuff throughout his career. Like, okay, that's probably your best outcome with Tua on the Falcons. And that might not be a best outcome because then you end up paying the guy and not opening the door for a higher upside quarterback and expanding your upside. I would say if I'm a Falcons fan, I don't want to find myself in the same place Dolphins fans were 2 years ago, where if you're realistic with yourself at all, you know you're never winning the Super Bowl with Tua Tagovailoa unless you get real damn lucky. But I would say that covers the Tua of it all pretty well. And then you have door number 2. Choose your, flip to page 66 and begin the Michael Penix version of the Choose Your Own Adventure book. An entirely different story. It's like a butterfly effect. I love that analogy. But yeah, Michael Penix, very different, but likewise at a very important kind of pivotal part of his career, and likewise a lefty injury-prone quarterback. So there's some similarities there, but in terms of who they are as quarterbacks, it's extremely different. And Stefanski's going to have to really do a good job coaching through this offseason, kind of like with a plan to give these guys opportunities to compete, but also allow the offense to develop into the year and get ready for the year for like what type of offense they're going to run. Because a Tua offense, very condensed, timing oriented, very different than a Michael Penix offense that is much more focused around like deep developing play action shot plays, maybe a little bit more traditional drop back, less RPOs. Like it's different. Like I said, that's a tough balance for Stefanski to manage because it's not just about the quarterbacks. It's about getting everybody else on the same page and coming into the season with a plan. Michael Penix currently has not been able to practice coming off the injury. But that window is going to be opening if not like already started in the last week, and I missed that. But it's anticipated that he's going to be like ready for training camp. But Tua does have a head start going through OTAs and minicamp with this offense and getting familiar with these playmakers. But anyway, Michael Penix is a very tough evaluation because you see the strong arm and a guy that is theoretically very fast. And you get excited about upside, right? Those speed and arm talent are most commonly affiliated with the word upside at quarterback. Reality is there's so much more to it. There's accuracy, there's processing and decision-making, there's pocket presence, there's knowing when and how to use your legs, not just are you fast. There's the debate of are you just straight line fast or are you effectively athletic? And I guess I can start there with Michael Penix. Like, he is fast in a straight line, but he is a very stiff athlete and doesn't really give you a lot of the creative additions that even like a Tua can give you, but what a lot of those super high upside quarterbacks give you. It can take him a minute to get rolling, which leads to a lot of these super athletic pass rushers able to run him down. He's not particularly elusive or creative at getting out of sacks or having explosive runs. If you give him a long, wide open runway, yes, he can get rolling and beat you with his legs. There's honestly a lot of Fernando Mendoza comparisons in terms of just like his frame, his athleticism. He's a little faster than Mendoza, but kind of that same idea, athletically speaking. But I think if we're just watching the film on Michael Penix, going back to Washington and what we've seen in Atlanta here, Penix has been a bit of a tough cookie to narrow down your thoughts on. A lot of young quarterbacks, it's either they just don't have it. You can tell like they're just never going to be good. Sometimes it's that clear. And then sometimes it's like, he has one or two really defining weaknesses that are holding him back currently. And it's like either he fixes it or he doesn't, which could be like, Justin Fields' inability to read a defense, Anthony Richardson inaccuracy issues. With Michael Penix, there's not really a one thing necessarily. I do think his pocket presence and that kind of natural feel in the pocket to feel the rush breakdown, knowing when and how to use his feet to extend plays, how to slide in the pocket, that was never there at Washington, and that's held him back at times in Atlanta. But that doesn't need to be a non-starter. Like Derek Carr always struggled with that. You can still be a good quarterback with that as a weakness, but I would say that is his definitive weakness right now. Beyond that, it's hard to say with certainty he can or cannot do pretty much anything else at the quarterback position. His tape has just been, for lack of a better term, wildly inconsistent. And the thing with inconsistency is that implies that there are high-end stuff as well on top of low-end stuff. And that absolutely applies to Michael Penix. In his rookie year, was that the Panthers game? Was that, I think it was his last game of his rookie year? One of the better quarterback games of the year. I think he had 7 big-time throws in that game. I think in year 2, there were less big moments and more bad moments, and that's why we're not particularly optimistic about Michael Penix right now, especially coming off the injury on top of that. But you load up the film and you definitely see, like, okay, he can drop dimes. He has an incredible arm. He can read defenses. He can throw with anticipation. He can do all of these things, but you don't know if he will do those things any given play. There's a lot of misfires. There's a lot of those, like, I know things are going better with Trevor Lawrence, but when things were going really rough with Lawrence at times, it was like all these almost throws where the ball's kind of in the area and you're like, well, the idea was right. The ball's right there. It's like he almost had that amazing pass. There was a lot of those with Michael Penix where it's a really good idea, but the throw's just not in the right spot. There's definitely inconsistency with just processing and decision-making mistakes. So to just kind of wrap this up, like, there's a path for sure where he can be like a Derek Carr-esque quarterback, I think. If the processing, decision-making, and accuracy can just come in a little bit, right? Because I don't think he's that far off from being that type of quarterback. Again, I think that pocket presence, that's why the Derek Carr comp comes in. Like, I just question if he has some of that sort of like it factor, that spatial awareness, the pocket movement. Like, that's always been an issue for me with Penix, and I've seen that in his NFL tape as well. But if he can get healthy, can he be a solid starting quarterback, a Derek Carr-esque player for this team? I think that's the best case scenario, or we just never see him play for the Falcons again. Like, Tua starts, looks better than Penix in camp, which I definitely could see happening, and it just reaches a point where it's like, Penix probably gets traded for like a 5th round pick. And it's time for him to get a change of scenery. There really are just so many different ways this thing could go here in Atlanta. It makes quarterback obviously just like the biggest of wild cards for the Falcons, which is going to determine how this season goes. And not just this season, like, if some of these best case scenarios happen, you start to get into some of those conversations of like, is that what's best for Atlanta? If you're a Falcons fan, I hate to say it, but like, are you genuinely pulling for Michael Penix to become Derek Carr or Tua Tagovailoa to get back to his old self? Is that really what's best for the future of the Falcons? Life with a purgatory quarterback can be very frustrating. And realistically, it might be best if, and I would never wish for injury with these guys, but it might be best if Tua plays like he did with the Dolphins last year. It couldn't be more clear that he is not the QB of the future. And if Michael Penix doesn't take hold of this job, and maybe you do end up with a new QB in a great QB class next year. I hate to kind of, have that outlook. I would love to hear from Falcons fans, like, just where are you at as a Falcons fan with like who you think starts, how you think they play? Do you share some of that sentiment that you kind of hope these guys both just fail? You get through the year and find a guy next year. Would love to hear from you guys. But again, the funny, like, crazy thing about this Falcons team is there are some of those best case outcomes for these quarterbacks, and we're going to get into the rest of this roster. If the quarterback play can just be the 22nd best in the league, which is far from impossible with this combination of guys, there's a lot of stuff to like here. And I made a Daniel Jones comp for Tua earlier. There's a little bit of that, 25 Colts type of stuff here. I like the Colts infrastructure a little better, but there's a little bit of that going on too. So love the choose your own adventure analogy. I do think this Falcons season is going to be a bit of an adventure book in that sense. But as far as their ranking, which I haven't mentioned yet, it's almost irrelevant with everything we just said. It's entirely unknown what type of quarterback play we're going to get here. But they do come in 30th for their quarterback grade, just with all the questions. And I think that's pretty fair. But let's put a smile on our face. It is far from all bad for this Falcons team. There's a lot of stuff to like with the Atlanta Falcons, especially with this next segment, which is running back. Now, before we wax poetic, obviously, about Bijan, let's talk about their offseason changes. They do lose Tyler Algier. I thought it was interesting. I thought at that contract, like 2-year, $11 million deal in Arizona, I thought they might just bring Tyler Algier back because he's been one of the best backup backs in the league and a great short yardage goal line option for them and someone that pounds out games if they are lucky enough to have a lead. But kind of a similar idea as they bring in Brian Robinson. Be careful in your fantasy drafts this year, guys. No, Bijan is not available in the 10th round of your fantasy drafts. And then they signed Tyler Goodson as well. But I said slightly downgraded, going from Tyler Algier to Brian Robinson. But let's break this thing down. And I do have the Falcons as the number 1 ranked running back room in the league. And I do give, at this point in time, Bijan Robinson the crown as the best running back in the NFL. And I know Lions fans just clicked off the video enraged. I go back and forth at times with Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs. That draft class is just unbelievable, man. Talk about historic. But I do think with the way Bijan finished the year last year and just the fact that he, to me, he just checks more boxes than Gibbs in terms of between the tackles and power and consistency. Bijan's not as fast as a Jahmyr Gibbs, but it's not like Bijan's slow. Plenty of breakaway ability in there. But yes, it's a tough debate. I am going to say at this point in time, Bijan, though, the best running back in the NFL. And I think this year, the Falcons are really going to challenge the idea that running backs don't matter because Bijan in his prime just turned 24 years old. No more Tyler Algier here. Kevin Stefanski, everything we talked about with his run game design. Bijan's gotten better every year. And now really this is the time to just lean into Bijan as the driver of this run game and through the receiving game as well, which I'll have to talk about, like how good he's been in that sense too. But he's got to be at the top of your list of like odds to lead the league in rushing, offensive player of the year candidates, like you name it, man. I think Bijan has just an absolute monster season. Would be my first pick in pretty much any fantasy draft situation. And as far as this deep dive series is concerned, like as far as running backs go, like Bijan is doing a fair share of heavy lifting to get the Falcons even to this 24th ranking because I think that highly of him. Just to wax poetic about his skill set just a little bit more here, though, even though it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, I put a LaDainian Tomlinson comp on him coming out. He's the highest graded prospect I've ever had. I don't go throwing around Hall of Fame, not just Hall of Fame, like top 3 players at their respective position ever. I don't go putting those comps out very often. In fact, that's probably the highest comp I've ever given a player. And it was really fun in some of these primetime games last year to actually see people using LaDainian Tomlinson clips in these broadcasts, comparing him to Bijan Robinson, because that's the player whose style he reminded me the most of. As, yes, a full-size runner, about 215 pounds. Yes, with like good speed and all of that, but the combination of rare elusiveness for a full-size back, paired with just incredible vision. It's like he's running through the Matrix and things are moving in slow motion. That jump cut is unbelievable. And honestly, I'm so excited because the Falcons have been one of the most wide zone oriented offenses since Bijan's been here. And Bijan can run wide zone, yes. But honestly, what he did at Texas that made him the level prospect that he was honestly more inside running, inside zone, power, where I think vision and patience and that elite trait that he has, that in between the tackles savviness, you think of like a lot of those like inside zone Le'Veon Bell run games for the Steelers, like some of that type of running style we haven't gotten to see that on full display in Atlanta because of the scheme they've been running. And yeah, they'll run wide zone here as well, but they're going to run a lot more duo, which I think is probably the best run scheme for Bijan Robinson, or gap as well. But between the tackles especially, like, I love that. And he's shown he can still be the best running back in the NFL running more wide zone than anybody else. But I think we are really going to see the best version of Bijan Robinson this year. And get ready, man. It's just going to be a ton of fun. So I'm all in on what Bijan brings to the table here. The receiving stuff as well. I didn't really mention, like, he was good at that in college, and that was always going to be a part of his projection. But he is the closest thing right now to kind of like that peak Christian McCaffrey, in the sense of, yes, he can run routes out of the backfield and be crazy elusive and bring all that stuff in like the typical ways you would use a running back in the receiving game. And that's amazing. That's a big part of it, obviously. But he can actually go play slot wide receiver. He can win routes. He can win really tough catches down the field. He is a really good, just like, receiver. And the last offense used him that way in some really creative ways. We'll see how Kevin Stefanski taps into that, or if it's a little bit more traditional in that sense, but you can do that with Bijan if you want. And he's even a pretty damn solid pass blocker as well, considering he's got all of this stuff, all this other stuff on his plate. Now, another thing that helps them get the first running back grade and helps them pull even a little bit further ahead of, like, spoiler alert, but the Lions. I mean, it's not a hot take to say, like, those are your top two backs in the league right now. But, like, Brian Robinson's a very reasonable, steady hand as a backup. He's not Tyler Algier, but he's better than where we're at with Isaiah Pacheco right now, for example, in Detroit. You know what you're getting in Brian Robinson. He is a full-size north and south runner. He's got a little bit more explosiveness than, Falcons fans would have seen with Tyler Algier. More of a one-track runner as opposed to a stop-start kind of guy like Tyler Algier can be at times, but brings that same power idea. He's been a, very reasonable sort of high-end RB2 that can start games if you need him to be. Don't have too much else to say on Brian Robinson, but a reasonable signing to replace Tyler Algier. And again, be careful in your fantasy drafts to not take him too early, but you might still want to draft him. Good handcuff and has touchdown potential with being more of a power runner. Now, after Brian Robinson, this is one of the thinnest running back rooms. Like, they signed Tyler Goodson to be their RB3. He's very small and has had a couple moments for the Colts, but he's RB3, RB4 type of depth. And then you have kind of undrafted types. Nathan Carter got on the field a little bit for them last year. I'm not terribly familiar with his game, but he's like 5'11", 200 pounds. Can't imagine there's a whole lot there, but hey, would love to be, surprised if he did get an opportunity here. Cash Jones, elite name, but obviously just goes down as unproven, undrafted rookie depth there. But yes, the number one ranked running back room in the NFL here for the Atlanta Falcons. Obviously a significant contributor towards their overall like grading and power rankings and that kind of stuff. This is the driver of the Atlanta Falcons here, is Bijan Robinson. But that said, as we go to the weaponry, this is another exciting part of the Atlanta Falcons. Let's first, though, look at their offseason changes with their pass catchers. And I said slightly upgraded at both wide receiver and tight end. At wide receiver, it's more about the very minimal losses. Darnell Mooney was good in 2024 and quite bad last year. So if we're comparing these to the 2025 Falcons, that's not much of a loss, though I think he's a bounce back candidate. Then David Sills actually played 52% of snaps last year for the Falcons. That honestly contextualizes things a lot now that I really think about it. Like, maybe this is massively upgraded. The fact that David Sills isn't going to have to play 52% of your snaps again this year, because they brought in a handful of different names that are all going to, contribute here. Jahan Dotson, Olamide Zaccheaus, Zachariah Branch will obviously break these guys down, but it's a nice group to come in here. So I said slightly upgraded at wide receiver, and then the same at tight end, where they lose nobody. And I already kind of talked about it. They added Austin Hooper to the mix here, effectively to be their starting tight end. But yes, beyond having Bijan, and obviously Bijan is also a part of this weaponry conversation, but the pass catchers here in Atlanta are the other big reason to get excited about this team. And maybe the idea of them having a pretty solid season, let's say winning the NFC South, that type of thing. This is a really fun group that's already good. As I rank these units and these teams closer to their floor, I have the Falcons in that tier that ranks 8th to 12th in the top third of the league for best weaponry in the NFL. But there is even further potential and upside for this to be maybe top 5, top 6, one of the best groups of weapons in the entire NFL. But as the center point of this passing game is something that is very much a proven commodity and not a question mark, and that is Drake London, who has just totally turned into one of my favorite receivers in the NFL, which is really fun considering I didn't love him as a prospect. I didn't. I thought he was more of a late first smasher, not a great separator. Realistically, and I've said this a lot at this point, but Drake London has just opened my eyes for how I watch the wide receiver position. And as a younger me, a younger scout, I was legitimately worried as a top 10 pick if his long speed was going to allow him to return that type of upside. And Drake London has forced me through watching his tape, watching him dominate at the NFL level, forced me to understand that number one, you don't have to be fast to separate, and you don't have to be fast to be an excellent route runner. Every few months, I feel like you get a tweet of who's the best route runner in the NFL. And you're going to get your classics, Devontae Adams and the likes. But honestly, man, people think of contested catches and size and physicality with Drake London. He is legitimately one of the best route runners in the NFL, and his teach tape to so many young wide receivers out there just to how to separate at the NFL level, man. And yes, he's not fast, but his footwork, his agility, foot speed is outrageous for his size, and he shows exactly how you should play physical as a route runner. I think so often our minds go to fancy feet and sharp cuts, and again, Drake London has sharp cuts, but working in space, breaking guys' ankles in terms of route running. But effective, efficient, good route running also includes playing through contact. The reality is NFL DBs are going to put their hands on you, and way more often than not, let's say 90% of the time, they're not going to get called for putting their hands on you. You have to hand fight. You have to use your elbow and win leverage and continue to play through contact. And yeah, it helps that Drake London's 220 pounds, but there's so many big wide receivers that don't run routes like Drake London. And you pair that physicality aspect of his route running with, yes, a guy that has quick feet, that is deceptive with his breaks and his cuts, that can separate more in space just with the sharp cuts and the deceptiveness. And yeah, you get a guy that separates, just simply put, so much better than I ever thought he would. Now, are you going to stick him on the outside and have him run go balls and outrun DBs? No, that's not his game. You want other people in this offense to be able to do that for you. But I like starting there with Drake London because the rest of it's obvious. This dude is maybe the best my ball bitch ball winner in the league right now. Yeah, Puka made a pretty good case for that last year, I would say. And to be fair, last season, Drake London's contested catch win rate came below 50% for the first time in his career. Contested catches can still be volatile at times, for sure. The first 3 years of his career, he was sitting at about 54% on average, never below 52%. Last year was at 43%. So you want to see that come back up. I think it will, especially because, and honestly, I maybe even regret bringing that up because he was great to start the season. And then after he came back from injury in week 16, he went 1 for 8 on contested catches, which obviously was enough to drop him below that 50% mark. So we should see that come back up. And yes, he is one of the best. Just put the ball in my area. I'm not going to elevate and catch the ball, but I'm going to box guys out, win that positioning. It's outstanding. And I think especially with a Tua, that could actually be really nice. For all of his faults, Tua is excellent at play action fakes, snap his head around, and he's going to put that ball where it needs to be. His accuracy can get away from him because his arm talent's not that great. The ball can sail on him at times. But in terms of being a thoughtful passer and understanding ball placement, and more often than not, putting the ball exactly where only Drake London is going to get it, that could also be a really nice part of this offense that is consistent with how Kevin Stefanski likes to scheme things up off play action. With Michael Penix, there's some more accuracy questions and ball placement questions, I think. And Penix is more of a let's launch go balls down the field type of idea. Not that he can't work really well with Drake London. We've seen him feed Drake London at times. So I don't want that point to get misconstrued either. But I do think him and Tua could actually make a lot of sense together. And this obviously just gives you an excellent starting point for these pass catchers. And then you get into kind of interesting wild card territory with the Falcons. But the next guy I want to talk about here is actually technically the tight end in Kyle Pitts. But this is going to be a very just fascinating year for Pitts for so many reasons. Number one is just his own play. Was the number 4 overall pick, has been really streaky, has actually, talk about contested catch win rate and stuff. That was something that was an elite trait for Kyle Pitts coming out of Florida. This dude caught everything, whether he was covered or had guys all over him. He's been like a sub 40%, 37% contested catch win rate guy in his first 4 years in Atlanta. He just didn't have, call it lazy analysis or just call it using your eyeballs. He didn't have that same dog in him that he certainly had at Florida that led to the Falcons drafting him before Jamar Chase and Penei Sewell. He was that type of prospect. He just hasn't been the ball winner that he was in college until last year, and specifically late last year. He seemed to get his mojo back. When the ball was in the air, he found ways to bring it down, used that 6'6" frame, used pretty solid separation. He's not this ridiculous route runner. He's dealt with some injuries. I think he's slowed down a little bit, but he's still a tough matchup problem for corners because you're either too small to contest those tough catches, or if you're a linebacker, or sometimes some of these safeties, most safeties are faster than Kyle Pitts at this point, but not all of them. But he can absolutely use that speed against bigger bodies and pull away. But it just, his defining trait just hasn't been there until this season. And in the final 6 weeks of the year, only 2 players had a better PFF receiving grade than Kyle Pitts, Puka Nacua and George Kittle, who also went on a tear. But Kyle Pitts was incredible down the stretch. And if those 6 weeks didn't happen, I think almost certainly we would have seen the Falcons just let Kyle Pitts walk. But they end up using the franchise tag on him and kind of give him another prove-it season here, just as last year was a prove-it season. And for a third of this season and the most recent part of what we've seen from him, he did prove it that guy is still in there. So just from a who is Kyle Pitts perspective, we love what we saw, obviously, from those last 6 games. And I would say his rookie year, he looked something like that, but obviously 3 down years after that, just not being too big of an impact for the Falcons. But he definitely gets that yellow arrow from me as a player that's tough to rank, where it could be a green up arrow if he plays like he did down the stretch and he has now figured it out. He's not even 26 years old yet. If he has now figured it out, he's going to be one of the most just challenging receivers to stop in the league. That's incredible. That's an outcome that's possible here. Or did he just get hot and he's going to cool off and go back to being what we've seen from him the last 3.5 years? I don't think you can rule that out from Kyle Pitts either. He's a massive wild card for this team from an evaluation standpoint. But just to be a nerd for a second here, I'm really excited to see what his usage looks like here with the Falcons. Not from a target standpoint. I think those will find his way one way or another as long as he's playing well. But is this the year where the idea that Kyle Pitts is a tight end starts to become a bit more far-fetched? Because as a blocker, there really aren't words to describe how useless Kyle Pitts is as an inline wide tight end blocker. It's to the point where teams might as well not even take him seriously. He might as well not be there a lot of the times. I mean, he's 6'6", 240 pounds. He cannot hold up. He can't get the leverage. He can't hold up. And I don't think he really brings it in that sense. I think Kyle Pitts likes to be outside in space, being a wide receiver, being that superstar. I do kind of question his desire to be in the trenches and block his ass off. I do. I'm sorry. You pair that with Kevin Stefanski coming in, who ran the second most heavy personnel in the NFL last year, who did a really good job with Harold Fannin, who has similar questions about his size and blocking ability. I think Harold Fannin is even more of a practical, tight end from a blocking perspective than Kyle Pitts. But Harold Fannin only played about 30% of his snaps as a tight end, and we've certainly seen usage similar to that here with Kyle Pitts, about 30% next to the tackle with his hand actually in the dirt. But you do actually have Austin Hooper here now. You have Charlie Warner. Those are two very practical blocking options for heavier personnel. This is kind of my take on this. I think the Falcons lead the league in 13 personnel this year because Kyle Pitts is listed as a tight end. He's going to get charted as a tight end. But I think a lot of early down offense for the Falcons is going to be obviously Drake London, Austin Hooper, Charlie Warner as your tight ends, and then Kyle Pitts largely as the second wide receiver. Yeah, maybe occasionally teams have to question if that should be treated as, heavy personnel. And this was a big thing with the Rams last year is 13 personnel and just guaranteeing teams have to come out in base defense against you. Because if you're running, and again, sorry for being really nerdy here, if you're running 12 personnel, but Kyle Pitts is the 12, is, there is your second tight end, teams will largely just be fuck it, we'll just run nickel. Kyle Pitts can't block. But if it's 13 or 12 and a half, they kind of have to come out in base. And then, for the majority of it, Kyle Pitts is just going to be the wide receiver. He'll line up in the slot next to Drake London on one side with an overload of tight ends on the other side, or you can just come out in, ace formation with both Hooper and Warner as tight ends on both sides with Drake London and Kyle Pitts as your outside wide receivers. You can go 3-by-1 with Pitts in the slot, whatever you want to do. Pitts largely just being a wide receiver because that's where he's best, is as a slot wide receiver, as a big slot, and as an outside wide receiver as more of an X type of guy. But with the Falcons, early down offense, especially being this idea of a 13 personnel offense, which again, piggybacking off of that being one of these sort of meta popular trends in the NFL last year, I am not saying this at all in a negative light towards Kyle Pitts. I think that is how you get the best out of Kyle Pitts, guaranteeing that he's going to have to see linebackers and box safeties loading up to try and stop what could be a really good run game out of this, and just limiting those negative plays from Kyle Pitts as a blocker and helping your run game in that sense as well. And yeah, occasionally he'll put his hand in the dirt with 3 tight ends to one side where he's guaranteed to block outside backers and slot corners because he's a little more willing to do that when he's out in space and that type of blocker. But I'm extremely excited to see how this all goes with Kyle Pitts this year. And given how he played to end last year, I'm cautiously optimistic that Kevin Stefanski's going to leverage Kyle Pitts as this team's kind of X factor, if you will. The guy that just is giving defensive coordinators fits. And that is in turn going to lead to production and a big contract for Kyle Pitts and him starting to get closer to being worth that massive pick that this team, drafted, obviously, with the 4th pick in the draft. Like, it's all fascinating with Kyle Pitts, man. But we are still ultimately a ways away from locking that in as a bona fide difference maker for this offense, because it has not always been that way for the Falcons. Even for the majority of last season, it was the last third of the year where we got to see that awesome version of Kyle Pitts. So he is definitely going to get that wild card icon. A big reason why the weapons here get that wild card icon, because even with some questions, and Kyle Pitts being in many ways unproven, the Falcons do still rank with this B+ grade, 8th to 12th in weaponry. Pretty easy to see how a positive outcome with Kyle Pitts here starts to push that up more towards top 5. But then after Kyle Pitts as just the sort of general number 2 option in this passing game, whatever you want to call him, I would say Bijan is next in the pecking order, honestly. Like, I don't need to spend too much more time on Bijan. We discussed him in depth, but everything he does in the receiving game, every time he can touch the ball, it is an impact to your passing game or just offense in general. But like I said, like, you can put him at slot and have him make tough catches. He absolutely bakes into this weaponry equation at this point. Honestly, probably more than any other running back in the league. Christian McCaffrey would I guess be the other guy to debate there. I think at this point Bijan's more efficient with his touches. But anyway, that's another conversation for the Niners deep dive when we get there. But I think you just, at this point, like, you kind of have the driver of what's already going to be a very run game oriented offense. There's not a need to feed too many mouths here. Like, you can see how Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan are the main components of this passing game, but everybody else just kind of sprinkles into a nice role that makes sense to me. And honestly, Jahan Dotson next, 2-year, $15 million contract this offseason as a buy low option for the Falcons. I'm not done with Jahan Dotson. I'm not. Jalen Hurts just is going to catch multiple strays throughout this deep dive series outside of the Eagles deep dive. We just did that in the Saints deep dive with the Kellen Moore conversation. And honestly, here with Jahan Dotson, like, there's very few worse wide receiver jobs in the league than having to be Jalen Hurts' number 3. They just don't spread the ball around enough. He just doesn't do a good enough job getting that many pieces involved. The pie in a Jalen Hurts passing game just isn't big enough for Jahan Dotson to succeed, but stepped up in the Super Bowl. First round pick for the Commanders, I don't think was bad early on. Something went wrong where they traded him to Philadelphia, but Philly was able to keep their wide receivers healthy and didn't have to really ask anything much more than Jahan Dotson just to occasionally catch the ball when they threw him his way. But I think in those limited looks, you still see a guy that has good separation skills, good ball skills, and as a number 2 here, can he be something like what Darnell Mooney was in 2024 and actually kind of develop here and turn out to be a pretty savvy little signing by the Falcons? He's not going to light up the stat sheet or blow anybody away and be like, oh my God, like, he's the one that the Commanders let get away. Like, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. But again, like, just filling in nicely as the 4th member of this passing game, I like the signing and think he's going to hold his own for what they're going to ask him to do. And then you have really these 2 gadget players, both Zachariah Branch and Olamide Zaccheaus. This is a situation where it was quite clear Stefanski comes in and he wants someone to get designed touches to, screen game, crossing routes, jet sweeps, you name it. They signed Olamide Zaccheaus in March, and then the opportunity in the 3rd round of the draft to select Zachariah Branch presents itself. These 2 guys fill the exact same role. Zaccheaus was we got to make sure we have a guy type of low-end signing, and Zachariah Branch brings really fun upside in this role and beyond. Zaccheaus is what he is, right? A Band-Aid gadget signing that honestly had a pretty rough year in Chicago. A lot of really bad drops in bad times. Drops are fickle, and he's played better ball than that in the past. He is what he is as that kind of undersized gadget slash speed slot type of receiver. Zachariah Branch projects as someone that can do that, I think, to a much higher level than what we've seen from Olamide Zaccheaus throughout his career. I was a fan of Zachariah Branch in this draft. I was, considering what he is. Like, this is a great example of a prospect that was the top recruit in his class, ton of expectations, never lived up to his expectations, and that tends to give you a negative reputation as a prospect and a football player, and Branch comes attached with that. He never lived up to his upside as the number one recruit in his class. He transferred from USC to Georgia, which is kind of an archaic passing game in many ways. That I would say it's not an understatement to say that Georgia struggles to understand how to utilize their weapons. And that all applied to Zachariah Branch. But you did get left with a guy that largely ate off of bubble screens, very short average depth of target, just kind of doing what it's pretty obvious he can do, which is be dynamic with the ball in his hands. He has a lot of rare, like, dare I say, elite athletic skills. I've compared him to like Kadarius Toney in the way that he moves. There's even moments with his change of direction and acceleration where you're like, that's what Tyreek Hill looks like, because Tyreek Hill obviously is a little faster than Zachariah Branch, though Branch is not slow. But it's not just the speed with Tyreek Hill. It was always the stop-start, acceleration, agility pairing with the speed that made him so special. Well, Branch at least has the change of direction, acceleration, agility that is just so rare for a wide receiver or any football player, really. And that's easy to leverage. That's easy to understand. Okay, as a design touch guy and a return man, that brings a certain floor to the table. You get a skill set there that you want to have on your football team, right? You can find it in a guy like Olamide Zaccheaus kind of anywhere you look, or you could go up to the top shelf with a prospect like Zachariah Branch that just brings another level of athletic ability. But when I watched Branch, I didn't want to just call it at that. I think in the very few moments where Georgia actually asked him to run corner routes and get down the field, you actually saw kind of sneaky good route running. Like, you see deceptiveness in some of the routes he ran. He did make some tough catches. He has some drops and frustrations with his ball skills that you'll want to see be more consistent at the next level. But there, to me, is a lot of potential for Zachariah Branch. I especially like the way that he fills in here, and I think they will absolutely find ways to get him the ball. It might be Olamide Zaccheaus for the first 6 weeks or whatever. It's just kind of the nature of rookies coming in when you have vets that do the same thing. Like, it could be Zaccheaus to start, but Branch is just so much more dynamic, and at some point you're going to want to see what he can do, not just getting the ball in his hands, but again, I think there's potential. My best case scenario for Zachariah Branch, ironically, was Jerry Jeudy, was the pro comp I wrote down, where the ball skills are maybe a little frustrating at times, but if the route running and athleticism can really reach a good point, you're going to have one of the better separators in the NFL. There's maybe a little like Deontay Johnson in there too. That skill set would really look nice inside this offense with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson. So I like the draft pick quite a bit. We'll see when he gets on the field. I think it'll happen eventually this season. And that's kind of your wide receiver core. It's an incredibly thin group of wide receivers. You have Dylan Drummond, who sniffed the field last year. Vinny Anthony was an underutilized player at Wisconsin that I do think showed off some decent route running and potential that could be a little bit of a gem and has an opportunity to make this team. So that's really it in terms of notable names. They might just keep 4 wide receivers here and practice squad a couple other guys in case you have injuries. Because again, Kyle Pitts, it's kind of like, in some ways, it's kind of like the Shohei Ohtani thing, where because he plays 2 positions, it gives you an extra roster spot somewhere else. Kyle Pitts kind of does that for you here, because with him, you have 5 wide receivers and 3 tight ends already. counting in Austin Hooper and Charlie Warner, of course. But that takes me to the tight end room. We're not going to spend much time here. Austin Hooper had a good year for the Patriots. He very much is what he is at this point. He is a big-bodied, very good blocker with very strong hands. Not really going to be a prolific go-to difference maker for your passing game, but when you call his number, he's going to be in the right place, and more often than not, he's going to catch the ball, and he's actually made some really impressive catches in his time in New England. So I like that signing quite a lot for what he's going to do and how he opens everything else up. Charlie Warner as well really has not seen many targets throughout his career, but he's a nice utility blocker that can play inline, fullback, flex tight end, you name it. And then maybe someone like Josh Simon or Jack Velling kind of come out of nowhere and make the team as an extra blocking specialist. They don't really have a traditional fullback here. Not that that's always really been a big Stefanski thing. And that really concludes your pass catcher conversation. It's a really fun group, a very good starting point with outrageous upside, honestly. If you hit all your green lights here, you've got one of the more like superstar focused, three-pronged approach with your passing game, even if it's a little bit less traditional because you don't get a lot of verticality from London, Pitts, or Robinson. And then everybody else just kind of sprinkles in really nicely in terms of complementary skill sets. So I'm a big fan of this group, even if there's some more unproven commodities baked into the core of it all. But let's go to the offensive line, our final position group for the Falcons offense. And we'll start by looking at their offseason changes. So I said slightly upgraded on the offensive line, and it's like the absolute, like, ever most slightly upgraded. The most notable thing is they part ways with Elijah Wilkinson, who's going to go be the starting right tackle for the Cardinals. Wilkinson actually played every single snap for the Falcons last year. You don't see that a whole lot. 100% of snaps played. And their addition is Jawan Taylor, who we'll talk about him, but like an ever so slight upgrade over what they got from Wilkinson last year. Also not listed there, by the way, is Caleb McGarry, who retired after missing all of last year. So we're just looking at last year's Falcons when we have these conversations, but also just worth a footnote there that Caleb McGarry retired. They did add a couple new depth pieces on top of all that with Wanya Morris, also from the Chiefs, and Ethan Anyanwa, a 7th-round pick out of Ohio State that didn't actually start for the Buckeyes last year. But let's dive into this offensive line, and they rank 15th, smack dab in the middle of the league. And as it's been here in Atlanta, this is more of a run-blocking focused offensive line than it is a pass-blocking unit. They rank 10th for run blocking and a good bit lower, 19th to 22nd for pass blocking. Has kind of become the status quo here in Atlanta, where they're pretty damn good in the run game, specifically in the outside zone run game, and then maybe more inconsistent in terms of drop back pass protection. But let's go through this group. You start at left tackle, and you have one of the easiest, most consistent conversations of any starter in this entire series in Jake Matthews, 34 years old. But this guy has been the same guy last year, really, that he was his second season in 2015. I mean, I doubt that there cannot be an offensive lineman that has been as durable and as consistent and as consistently who they are as Jake Matthews. Every single year, you can just pencil in, he's going to play every game. He's played 1,000 or more snaps the last 10 seasons. He played 944 in his rookie year, and I don't know if that's because he didn't start week 1 or necessarily why that was. Let's just look real quick. Yeah, he wasn't a starter the first couple weeks of his career. And week 3, he was named the starter, and feels like he hasn't missed a game since. If he has, it's been like a game here, a game 4 years later. Like, it's incredible how stable he is. He is just a technically sound pass blocker. He's a very solid run blocker. Never been the most dominant all-pro level guy. He'll take his losses. You know, he's not the most traitsy guy, but God damn it, if Jake Matthews isn't going to be somewhere between the 8th and 15th best tackle, left tackle specifically, in the NFL every single year. So you're expecting another year of that until it doesn't happen. You want to note that he's 34 years old, and that's about it. Matthew Bergeron at left guard. He's actually the only guy in this offensive line that I put the green up arrow on. I feel like he's gotten incrementally better, especially as a pass blocker where he really struggled coming into the league, making that switch from left tackle to left guard. But he's incredibly athletic. He gets after it in the run game. He's got really good play strength. The growth for him has been more incremental than sizable. So I don't think we're going to see like some massive leap from Bergeron and he becomes like an all pro or anything like that. But I will say, like we mentioned, Wyatt Teller kind of coming out of nowhere and being an all pro type of guy, getting weaponized by Kevin Stefanski. There's more potential for him to really stand out doing more than just wide zone. Like all these guys have proven they can block wide zone with the best of them. Bergeron has really learned how to do that over the years. But he's got size. He's got athleticism to get pulled and moved and used kind of like Wyatt Teller was used at times. So I do think this system, especially from a run blocking standpoint, is going to be good for him, and just continued natural progression with his pass blocking where it's gone from bad to adequate over the years. I still like his trajectory for sure. So you're feeling really good. Left tackle, left guard. You add some questions to the mix with Ryan Neutzel. He's an undersized, kind of lowly drafted center that's done a really good job filling the shoes of Drew Dahlman, who left last year for the Bears and then retired, surprisingly. But I think Neutzel does have a little more to prove in, like, okay, we know he can block wide zone. Like, undersized, athletic, move blocking center. That's the archetype for him. How does he handle more gap stuff where you are being asked to drive guys off the ball a little bit more? If you get into drop back passing game, I think there's always going to be questions about Ryan Neutzel where he can pretty easily get overwhelmed if isolated one-on-one. He's an okay player. Specifically though, like, a fit catered for that wide zone mentality. And again, it's not like they won't run that here, but I think you've got him circled as like, okay, he's not a bad player and isn't going to be a bad player, but are there weaknesses and limitations in his game? And can you probably do a little bit better at center and see a few less losses in pass pro and get a little bit more drive off the ball in some of the other run schemes you want to run here? I think that could be where we're left with Ryan Neutzel, but you know, he's okay. And then you have Chris Lindstrom at right guard, who just might be the most polarizing player in the league, not from like conversations point or anything. Like everybody agrees Chris Lindstrom's one of the 5 or 6 best guards in the NFL. But he's polarizing in terms of his skill set. He is actually not very good as a pass blocker. He's adequate to maybe even below average. If you look at pressure rate, he has some of the more ugly losses in pass pro that you'll see. Like Derek Brown is his father, for example. And especially these last 2 years, that's really been revealed as like, okay, Chris Lindstrom deserves like Pro Bowl praise. He's probably the best run blocking guard in the NFL. That's incredible. But don't expect to just leave him on an island with great pass rushing D tackles and be able to set it and forget it. He's going to get beat in that sense, and has limitations. He's like a great hitter in baseball that can only hit righties. There's aspects of his game that you do have to account for and understand, that he's going to take his losses in pass pro. But dude, as a run blocker, this is just like an even more supercharged version of Wyatt Teller for Kevin Stefanski. I think we could get an all-pro season from Chris Lindstrom again here this year because there's going to be so many highlight blocks, not just doing wide zone stuff, where Chris Lindstrom is like, if you're teaching young offensive linemen what blocking wide zone from right guard is supposed to look like, you're going to show him Chris Lindstrom, the reach block ability, the ability to run his feet, sustain blocks, and then finish blocks with tenacity, with elite athleticism. It's incredible. But I think he has enough girth, enough play strength to drive guys off the ball a little bit, and certainly as a puller a little bit more with that athleticism. We could see some really fun stuff because there is a difference between pulling and reach blocking in wide zone. And with his athleticism and tenacity to go finish blocks, there could be some Chris Lindstrom highlight reels this year, man. There really could in a Kevin Stefanski run game. So, again, very polarizing conversation with him. He is roughly a top 5 guard in football, just very, one-sided in terms of what he's elite at. And then you got Jawaan Taylor. He's also kind of polarizing player, both in terms of conversation and play style. There's been a lot of discourse about Jawaan Taylor and his early starts. He kind of jumps the snap, and the NFL kind of like cracked down on it. I even had a little clip about it, how the Chiefs, kind of got screwed on this because he got away with it in Jacksonville when no one was paying attention. He had 7 penalties in 2022, the year before Jacksonville let him go, and he had a pretty good pass blocking year. And then he goes to the Chiefs, and everybody's highlighting this like, hey, this guy is starting early. These are false starts. And get ready for it. Jawaan Taylor was penalized 24 times in 2023, 19 times in 2024, and 13 times last year. So he's still going to see what he can get away with at times, whether it's jumping a little bit early on those really critical downs. Sometimes he'll get caught for it. Sometimes he won't. He can be a little grabby. But he's still a very adequate pass blocker in terms of the end result, but a polarizing one at that's going to put your offense in some compromising situations at times, really because of the penalties, but he'll take his losses as well when he's not cheating the rules. And he's also just been a pretty bad run blocker, dude. Like, there's no reason for him to be such a bad run blocker. I think he's athletic and pushes 330 pounds is at least his listed weight. But I do think like the play strength side for him has never really translated in terms of moving people. I don't know if it's just something doesn't click for him in the run game or what it is, but he's always been a guy that has a lot of bad blocks in the run game and has been a better pass blocker than a run blocker. So it's kind of an interesting skill set to have next to Chris Lindstrom, who's kind of the opposite, and Ryan Neutzel. And some of the guys they've had in the past have been better run blockers than pass blockers. So it's a different style with Jawaan Taylor, but he's a Band-Aid after McGarry retires. They had to find some sort of pivot, and it can be kind of challenging to find that in the middle of nowhere. And Taylor was a decent enough pivot, just far from a perfect player. And there's your starting 5. Like, it's a good unit. Again, there's some imperfections scattered throughout this offensive line, especially when it comes to pass blocking. It'll be fun to see these guys that have been just mashing wide zone time and time and time again, getting into a little bit more duo and some other stuff as well, and kind of filter through who can block everything, who can't. Ryan Neutzel, especially, I've got some questions if he's going to be a long-term answer for them in this system. But overall, again, smack dab in the middle of the league is your 15th best offensive line. We can run through the depth. It's pretty standard NFL depth, but there's teams that have much worse depth than this. Wanya Morris has dealt with a lot of injuries, was an intriguing prospect, and I think at this point you're probably talking about him as just a pretty adequate backup as far as backup tackles are concerned. He's gotten some starts, and some have been better than others, but he's got some traits and experience under his belt. So I don't hate him as a backup tackle, but he's a backup tackle. Mike Jarrell has played on some of those infamously bad Seahawks offensive lines. He struggled. And then you have these two almost identical, like 6'7" Wisconsin prospects. Jack Nelson was a 7th round pick either last year or the year before that. And then Ryan Malman, they pick up undrafted. Both these guys are in that kind of like Caleb McGarry mold. They're not as good as Caleb McGarry, but the idea of like, we're big and relatively athletic and love to run block, but in terms of finding leverage with our anchor and getting our hands on you as a pass blocker, there's a lot of struggles there. But that's definitely been their type historically, is like the Caleb McGarry, Jack Nelson, now Ryan Malman type of guy. And then interior offensive line, you have a couple of just kind of like standard veteran depth options. Kyle Hinton has played a little bit on and off, has looked like standard backup depth. Same thing with Corey Levin. So you have at tackle, guard, and center, you have one guy that you can go to. And if it's, as long as it's just a game or two, you can survive with that type of depth. Some teams have interesting depth that you actually kind of want to see some of these guys get out there. You don't want to see Wanya Morris, Kyle Hinton, and Corey Levin, but you might be able to survive it compared to like the Saints, who we talked about, who they don't have options. They also drafted Ethan Onyanwa, It's in the Falcons' court to prove that they saw something that we didn't. Ohio State didn't even start him last year after he transferred there, but he's got the theoretical measurables to develop. James Brockermeyer was the starting center at Miami. That I was pretty underwhelmed by his tape, and I'm not surprised he went undrafted. But he fills into the Ryan Neusel archetype of center. Maybe he surprises. Layden Robinson as well is an interesting reclamation project for Stefanski. Once upon a time, I know I've said Wyatt Teller's name like 8 million times at this point, but once upon a time, Wyatt Teller was a reclamation project, kind of like Layden Robinson. He's big and nasty in the run game, but he just doesn't really connect in a lot of his blocks and is a horrible pass blocker. But I don't hate the bringing him in and see what he can do. But overall, I mean, yeah, pretty damn serviceable offensive line. I don't know that there's a ton of upside for them to like encroach on the top 10 for offensive line and be this incredible unit. I more see a pretty solid floor with this group that, especially from a run blocking perspective, we largely know what these guys can do. That is going to really contribute to a very good run game here in Atlanta. And then pass blocking will probably just be okay, kind of like it's been here. Not going to derail your passing game, but not going to give you forever to throw either. So you put all this together. What are we talking about with this Falcons offense, this very interesting Falcons offense? Well, it's a polarizing offense, to say the least, in the sense that they are 7th in the NFL for run game grade for me. That is our highest graded individual pocket of an offense or a defense so far, to have the best running back in the NFL in a run game that is pushing top 5 in the league. That is absolutely a statement here from the Falcons as our 24th team in the power rankings. The passing game, on the other hand, much more consistent with where this team is ranked, 24th, with the biggest question coming with the quarterback. So if you can get some green lights from Tua or Michael Penix, it is extremely easy to see a path for this to be a top half passing game in the league, if not even a little bit better. But even like, okay, let's be the 16th best passing game in the league with a top 5 run game. That can be a top 10 offense quite easily. It just needs to be one of those two quarterbacks figuring it out. That's a big if, but it's a possible if. As far as the final offensive grade for the Falcons, they are 19th for me. So that as well is a pretty good starting point, even with some of these quarterback questions. Like, I still think this can and should be a pretty good offense, even with Tua and Penix having frustrations about them, to say the least. So the offense definitely gives us something to work with here for the Falcons. But let's flip over and talk about this Falcons defense, which is, I guess, equally fascinating, man. There's a lot going on with this Falcons defense that, again, had some pretty good moments last year. But there's a lot to sort through here if they're going to be a good defense again this year. So let's begin looking at their offseason changes on the defensive line. And geez, man, get ready for it. There's a lot of shakeup here. Guys coming back from injuries, moving pieces, trades, suspensions, you name it. It's all here for the D-line offseason changes. When you look at the interior of the defensive line, they are losing their best player. David Onyemata, who went and signed with the Jets. Ruka Rororo gets traded for Mason Smith, a fascinating swap of recent second-round draft busts, frankly, even though Falcons fans will point to some unblocked stunts where Ruka Rororo got some sacks. But a swap of depth pieces there. They get Zach Harrison back from injury, which is certainly notable. Nice player on the inside there that only played 22% of their snaps last year. They signed Deshaun Hand over from the Chargers, who's had a nice kind of late career reemergence here. And then they also draft the athletic Ontario Thompson in the 7th round. So that's just on the interior of the defensive line. David Onyemata is a big loss there. He was their best interior player. They get some adequate pieces to fill in here, but I did say slightly downgraded at interior defensive line. And then you go to the edge group. Again, catch your breath, because we got to shuffle the deck again here. So in terms of losses, you say goodbye to Leonard Floyd, who was okay for them last year, 42% of snaps. So that's a moderate loss. Arnold Ebiketie played 35% of snaps and was not good. So that's less of a notable loss. And then you also have to bring up James Pierce Jr.'s arrest and offseason debacle here. Obviously, a still developing and sticky situation. The police reports tell us that he was arrested, fled in his vehicle, crashed his vehicle, ran away from the cops. Obviously, not a great look there. Charges have since been dismissed if he successfully completes certain conditions. He has also recently returned to the team, and now the NFL will conduct their own investigation. These things get messy, right? Without going too much further into it, there's a chance that James Pierce gets suspended this year for 6 games, 12 games. There's a chance he plays all year and gets suspended next year. There's a chance no suspension is coming. At this point in this recording, it's just really hard to say, but it's another wild card for this team. Is just kind of where are we at with the James Pierce situation needs to be mentioned in terms of what this team has compared to last year's team. So that's coded in yellow for James Pierce. And then you do have some additions on the edge. They signed Samson Ebukam, Azeez Ojulari, some veteran rotational options there, Cameron Thomas as well. All nice little pieces to bring in here. And then also Braylon Trice, who they drafted in the 3rd round 2 years ago. And one of the wildest things that I discovered getting ready for this, I didn't realize Braylon Trice has not played a single snap for this team since they drafted him 2 years ago. That is a crazy stat, but they're hoping he can be a contributor for this team this year and he can start to do something here. So it's a little all over the place. I took the coward's way out and said, no way to say with all of this. I think if James Pierce is able to go all year, you add in some of these additions, that's a slight upgrade. With these vets coming in to replace Floyd and Ebiketie, which are not anything really notable in terms of losses. If James Pierce gets suspended for even 6 games, you're probably talking about a downgrade. And in between all of this, it could just be kind of neutral and a similar group to what they had last year. So there's all your changes. You can make the decision if they got better, worse, or stayed the same at edge. But let's talk about this Falcons defensive line, which, unfortunately, Falcons fans, it had to be somebody. The Falcons rank as my worst defensive line in the NFL. They do. An unfortunate statement that has been said about far too many Falcons defensive lines to this point in time. It feels like for as long as I've been watching Jake Matthews be a franchise left tackle, for that same amount of time, I've been watching the Falcons not be able to rush the quarterback. And last year was a departure from that, largely because of the scheme and the blitzing and the stunting and everything we talked about. But you do have some hope here as a Falcons fan. Yes, even if I rank you 32nd right now as a floor ranking with questions about James Pierce and how much he's going to play this year factored into that, you do at least have some hope that you have an edge rush duo of the future between your 2 first-round picks from last year in James Pierce and Jalen Walker. Both of these guys had really promising rookie seasons. I don't think we're through the woods and we're all the way there yet with where you need to be with these guys. But as far as investing in edge rusher in the first round of the draft on the field, these guys look like they can really get there and be one of the better edge rush duos in the league someday. But both these guys are very different, so let me discuss them individually. And I will start with James Pierce Jr. there. Obviously, first and foremost, not only does he need to get back on the field from his current situation, but this was a player that did fall in the draft because there was a lot of noise about off-field red flags with this guy. So the fact that this happened, it's kind of a where there's smoke, there's fire situation. So even if he gets dismissed from this situation, if he's going to reach his upside, he needs to be a mature professional football player, stay on the field and continue to get better with his craft. That goes without saying. But as a player, I think James Pierce was the better pass rusher of these two between him and Jalen Walker out the gate. Especially if we're going to talk about, like I said, this scheme does a lot of heavy lifting to tap into guys' athleticism, game up the pass rush. There's no doubt to me that side of this pass rush being present is going to be there. But at the end of the day, you want Jimmys and Joes. You want someone that can line up and get to the quarterback quickly and end a drive on a 3rd and 9. You want someone that can win those pass rush reps one-on-one so you don't have to get too cute about it. And James Pierce was the one that was able to do that on this D-line. Jalen Walker, who we'll talk about, is still getting there. Maybe someday he can do that. But those true pass rush situations really is where James Pierce made an impact and become such an important part of this as it currently is constructed. Like Walker and Pierce's pressure rate and even like their pass rush win rate on every snap is actually pretty close. But when you boil it down to those true pass sets, obvious passing down situations, Jalen Walker, drafted as much more of a linebacker hybrid, still learning his craft, how to beat NFL tackles one-on-one. Jalen Walker was 103rd out of 129 eligible players in pass rush win rate on those true dropback sets. James Pierce, while not perfect, was 45th, a very good starting point for a rookie and a massive bit better than Jalen Walker. And the film shows you like James Pierce, much more effective with the bull rush, more rush moves, and ability to get those quick wins, those quick impactful moments as a rusher. This defensive line desperately needs that from him this year and beyond. And I think just as a rookie, James Pierce already established himself as like, he's a very playable, I would say, like edge 2 currently, just in terms of pass rush production and all that stuff. But he's still super young. He's still learning how to stem moves together. I still think he could add a little bit of muscle to his frame, where his speed to power ability is already pretty good. Like there's absolutely a world where James Pierce can be more of a low end 1, high end 2, like real difference making edge rusher. Whereas last year you certainly saw those flashes, but the final product throughout the course of the season just not quite there yet. What you do have to mention with James Pierce Jr. wasn't asked to defend the run at Tennessee and was equally horrible defending the run here in his rookie season. I mean, it's basically like James Pierce, you can assume, is not going to be great at identifying the run, shedding blocks, and being a physical presence on early downs until he shows you, I hate to say it, but like until he shows you he has a whole lot of interest in doing that. I think there's some traits in there, especially if he bulks up to someday be a much better run defender. He has the frame to do it, but he is a little bit more skinny and, struggles in run defense, certainly. And they're going to want to continue sheltering that with some of these rotational guys like Ebukam and Aguilari, which can do it much better for you and keep James Pierce health fresh on later downs. But then you got Jalen Walker, who we talked about a little bit already, but he's a very different player. Just from that point we just talked about, the run defense, Jalen Walker's awesome as a run defender. Playing at Georgia, like they asked a lot of him. They asked him to wear a lot of different hats. He sees the run well. He plays with his absolute hair on fire. This dude is a brick shit house. Like he's technically an undersized edge rusher. He's a little shorter. His arm length's a little bit shorter, but dude, he doesn't have a whole lot of room to add muscle. Like we said with James Pierce, like that part of Jalen Walker, that's pretty figured out. And when he loads his hands inside to take on blocks, when he hits as a tackler, like he brings a physical element to your run game, especially as that kind of stand-up edge where he can also use his quickness to shoot gaps and out-leverage players. So like he is way ahead of James Pierce as a 3-down impact, and that matters. You love where he's at there. As a pass rusher, Jalen Walker was largely, and I went through his pressures again today just to confirm what I remember watching from him after the season, just because I'm not trying to be down on Jalen Walker, but my eyes tell me what my eyes see, and he doesn't really win one-on-one pass rush snaps yet, and he didn't at Georgia. He does one thing quite well, and that is that speed move and the bend around the corner. And it was, I'm again, not trying to hate, but realistically, it was largely against backup tackles that weren't able to get that depth. And he can hit the top of the drop, and he's got really good bend for an edge rusher. So he's got the speed to rip move down that can play. That alone is not going to cut it. The vast majority of his production came, working his way through play action with like hustle pressures where tight ends are like botching their blocks against him. They were unblocked pressures and they were on stunts where he's awesome as a stunt man in this system. They drafted him largely knowing they were going to get that out of him. You can get that out of a lot of athletes. And I wouldn't say Jalen Walker he's a very good athlete, but he's not a mega athlete. He's fast, but he's not absurdly fast. You know what I'm saying? Like he's just a good, maybe even great athlete, but not an elite athlete. He drew some like Micah Parsons, Abdul Carter comps. He's not that type of athlete. He's just a very good one. So year 2 and beyond here with Jalen Walker, now it's going to be like, all right, can we start to stem together some swipes, maybe a spin move? Can we hit the bull rush more consistently? Because there's little glimpses with those rocked up arms with speed to power, but it was not there nearly enough. Can we start to ramp this thing up? And he might have a bigger upside than James Pierce Jr. He just might, but the pass rushing tool belt is just not there right now. So again, very different players. If James Pierce can just mature and get beyond this legal issue and then stay on the field and then develop, these guys have a very bright future. They have a lot more still to prove. And that's, I hate to say it, but like kind of all you have on this Falcons defensive line. Pretty much everything else here is Band-Aid, rotational, standard NFL depth, honestly, that many of these guys are going to have to step into starting roles, especially if James Pierce gets suspended here. But let's finish the edge group real quick. Samson Abuka, loved him in his prime, big injury. He's come back from it, still plays with his hair on fire. His biggest role here is to get James Pierce off the field on first down and maybe inspire a little bit of tenacity in James Pierce to be a better run defender as a bit of a mentor there, but doesn't offer too much left as a pass rusher at this stage, deep into his 30s, coming off that big injury. But he's a nice rotational piece, as is, Azeez Ojulari. He's never really reached any semblance of upside. He's also just been hurt constantly, so that's a question with him as well. But he's just an okay player, second-round pick that just, adequate tools. Not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy, not the strongest guy. It's hard to become much more than just a rotational edge player without those physical measurables. It just matters so much at this position, but he's an okay player. Braylon Trice is fascinating. He had a great bull rush coming out of Washington, a little bit stiffer, more of a one-dimensional straight line player. It's why he ended up going to the 3rd round. Who knows how healthy he is at this point, but keep an eye on him, especially if you're missing games from James Pierce and you need somebody that can kind of compress the pocket and give you that bull rush, because you don't think about that very much with James Pierce, but the bull rush is probably the best thing he does right now. Cameron Thomas is interesting as well, especially giving you a run defense presence up front. He might even play a little bit of 3-4 end. He's messed around with that at times, but he's just kind of a savvy, bigger edge that actually has a little bit of some tricks as a rusher and had a nice year in Cleveland last year. It's not an ideal scheme fit for Cameron Thomas. I like him as a, 5 tech in a 4-2 front. That's not really what they run here. But decent enough signing as a player. And then D'Angelo Malone's been a complete flop as a traits-based developmental prospect. But there's your edge group. You got your interior D linemen. So I like that you get Zach Harrison back. He's a nice player. He's a tweener who has to kind of be this team's best interior defensive lineman at about 275, 280 pounds at 6'5". Like, okay, that's a theme with this defensive line I'm not even going to say borderline on. I would say it is definitely arrogant that this defense thinks that they can be as light as they are. Harrison's about 275 to 280. Brandon Dorlus is right in that ballpark. Deshaun Hand has always been kind of like a 4-eye, 3-tech kind of guy. He plays at about 295. Mason Smith is north of 300 pounds, but he has some of the worst pad level you've ever seen. Jacksonville got sick of him. LaCale London's probably their biggest guy, but he's very unproven. Antonio Thompson was a lighter athlete-based defensive tackle. I love the idea of having athletes on the D line and running stunts and what it does for your pass rush. I just don't fully understand why you can't have your cake and eat it too and have a little bit more size and proven run defense. And they had that with like David Onyemata last year, could at least do a little bit of it. Even Ruka Rororo was a little bit stockier than most of these guys. I think they got worse in terms of size and run defense ability to just defend duo and like not get run over on earlier downs. So that's just a major note on this entire defensive line. But yeah, Zach Harrison is a nice player, largely when he's been able to play like as a 3-4 end or even like a base end as like a 5 technique at his size. And then he's got all that athletic ability. He's got a good bull rush. He's got a lot of that stuff that they want out of this position group on pass rush downs. So getting him back matters. I don't love Zach Harrison as your best interior D lineman. Deshaun Hand, again, nice player. He's been kind of a number 3 for his last couple spots with the Chargers and the Dolphins, and just kind of does a little bit of everything. Balanced player. He's reemerged after breaking out right away. His rookie year in Detroit was awesome. It looked like they found a superstar out of Alabama. Then he just vanished from the face of humanity, only to reemerge here at about 28, 29 years old. Again, if he's your third piece and you're moving him around and he's doing a little bit of everything, just as he's been the last couple of years, it's a nice player. As your biggest run defense impact on your D-line, don't love that. Don't love that at all. I hate that. Then you got Brandon Dorless. He's, again, everything they look for as just an athlete that they can run loops and stunts, and that's the majority of what he brings to the table. He had some wins with the bull rush in the first step. Like, as a part of this rotation in this system, you get what he brings to the table as a complementary piece to their pass rush. Mason Smith gets traded for here. We'll see if a change of scenery can light a fire under Mason Smith's butt. Just there's not really been any development with him since he was a 5-star recruit that went to LSU and then had some injury issues that really derailed what looked like a promising young career there. Still ended up off of that going in the second round to Jacksonville. He's definitely athletic, and Jags fans, by the way, Jags fans, you guys are freaking nuts. I respect it, but I hate it at the same time. I said when this trade happened, I said Mason Smith has shown flashes. Literally, I'm talking about like the flashes he showed at LSU, and he had one game against the Raiders where like he reminded you that he's got like a really nice swim move and he can move really well. Like, yes, when Mason Smith has flashed, you can see the idea of what made him a second-round pick, why the Falcons are still like throwing a flyer on him, despite the fact that he's done nothing at the NFL level. He's a bust of a second-round pick. If something ever clicks, okay, like we could get something out of Mason Smith, but it's extremely unlikely. LaCale London, my hot take for this Falcons team, which is probably really stupid, and it might not surface because I don't know how much LaCale London's going to play. I think LaCale London might be the best interior defensive lineman on this team right now. I've always liked what I saw. He was, I think, in the 2024 Falcons deep dive, I said, like, from my film watch on the Falcons, I was like, I don't know, this LaCale London guy really stood out to me, and he stuck around. He still only plays like 200, 300 snaps. He's always graded well. He's actually about 300 pounds, and he is stocky and like can hold up against the run. He's even had occasional moments as a rusher. He hasn't proved enough to like have anything to stand on to say that LaCale London is this team's best interior D lineman, but if they continue to give him opportunities, I could see it. At least him making his way through being like an adequate starter. And then they drafted Antario Thompson out of Washington, who wasn't much of a player at Washington, but he tested really well and got himself drafted. So we'll see how he can develop. And there's your Falcons defensive line. They still have a lot of work to do here, just filling out future pieces. Like, other than Pierce and Walker, I don't know if any of these players are on like the 2028 Falcons, for example. It's just a bunch of meh, adequate depth, I suppose. But when your depth is also your starters, like, okay, that's just worse than what pretty much everybody else in the league is dealing with. And your edge rushers have a lot of work to do in terms of development. It was a great starting point. I think they can absolutely become really impactful players. And even within this season, absolutely, if Pierce and Walker take a step forward, even if you've got some lack of upside with the interior D-line, they can dig themselves out of being the 32nd ranked defensive line in the league. But we do rank these teams and players closer to their floor, and we need to see more consistency as a rusher from both these guys. We need to see Jalen Walker able to like win one-on-one reps before we can get there, really. And yeah, certainly at the end of the season, we'll look back on this. I don't think the Falcons will be dead last in sacks, pressures, that type of stuff. Their scheme caters to that, right? If you blitz as much as the Falcons do, you're going to end up getting after the quarterback. And that's reflected in my pass defense coach rankings, which ultimately helps the pass defense here. But there's trade-offs to that. This is a laughably light front that big offensive lines are going to go straight at and challenge. And when you blitz that much, it demands more out of your secondary as well. But there's your defensive line. We'll see where it goes this year. Let's go to linebacker, where there's a bunch of moving pieces here as well. So they lose a couple pieces, most notably Caden Ellis, who goes back to the Saints. Just a yo-yo career there, but that's a loss from a run defense standpoint. That's some size and physicality and an excellent blitzer as well. It's no longer here. Ronnie Harrison also stepped in and gave them some good snaps when you had some injuries there to Divine Diablo. So both those guys are gone. It's not nothing. In terms of additions, there's not a ton to write home about either. So Troy Anderson does come back from the injury, hopefully. Is still a fascinating player that we'll talk about. They signed Christian Harris from the Texans and then spent a pair of day 3 picks on some fascinating kind of projects in Kendall Daniels and Harold Perkins. So I did say slightly downgraded at linebacker, unfortunately. And as we start talking about these linebackers, it is also worth noting that this is an extremely light, undersized group of linebackers, especially if we're talking about Christian Harris winning the starting job, where right now he is listed with the starters. That's a bold choice, Cotton.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
Let's see if it plays out for them, having the lightest D-line and one of the lightest linebacker rooms in the league after you said goodbye to Christian Ellis, who plays at a good 240 pounds. Now, maybe Troy Anderson can fill those shoes. We'll get there. I want to start with Divine Diablo, and I don't want to be overly negative here. Divine Diablo was awesome last year. Really looked like a breakthrough signing, and the definition of something I say on this channel all the time: gamble on the athletic mid-round linebacker prospects that went through their lumps and bruises on that rookie contract. The team gave up on them. And then year 5, year 6 is a very common breakout age for so many linebackers in the NFL. Divine Diablo is no different, especially on guys that were like safeties in college. And Diablo definitely played his best ball last year in this defense. And I think we just continue with the up arrow on him. Yes, even though he's in his 6th season, that's actually very normal for NFL linebackers around Divine Diablo's age to be continuing to get better. It's just is such a hard position that takes so long for these guys to learn. And I think we really saw things clicking for Diablo. Now, he missed about a third of the season. I do still think from a run defense standpoint, we're not fully through the woods yet in terms of like, are we good with Divine Diablo as the best linebacker in an NFL linebacker room in terms of, does he have the size, block take on ability, diagnostics, everything to be like that dude as a run defender? I think I'm not writing it off. I feel like he plays a little bit above the 223 pounds that he's listed at. He looks a little bit bigger to me, but there's definitely still some play strength concerns with him. But there was a lot of good with him last year as well. And again, that arrow is pointing up. He's been largely a issue in run defense with the Raiders. And I would say last year was really good for the most part, with a couple of stinkers in there. And there was still some games with some tackling issues that showed up. But that's really the end of the list in terms of question marks with him, because he flies to the ball. He's got that maniac mentality. He's got great playmaking instincts. And the coverage stuff especially just clicked last year in this defense, whatever it was, development, new system. I mean, he had in 4 years with the Raiders, he got his hands on 3 balls in 4 years, 3 passes defended in 3 years. last year, despite missing a third of the season, he had 7 passes defended. And this is a former safety that can really move. He's got good length. Like, there's so much to like with him that he's a major breakout candidate still, even if last year it was kind of like a little bit out of nowhere, like, oh, like Diablo's a player now, still on his way towards proving that the floor is going to be there consistently. But I think with what we saw last year, we saw glimpses of that ceiling, and it's pretty damn exciting as like a potential top 10 linebacker in the NFL. So it's a big year for Divine Diablo, and I may or may not have him as my breakout player on the defense when we get to my superlative awards. But a big issue with this Falcons linebacker room is not that Divine Diablo still has a little bit to prove. It is that they don't have an LB2 right now. That's kind of a problem. That's half of the picture, right? 2 of these guys got to be out there. And I don't know that they have an answer right now. So Christian Harris just gets brought over here from Houston. And like I just said, I like the dart throw on an athlete that was a safety when he came out as a high school prospect, I think. Was a 3rd round pick. And, just like I said with Diablo, gamble on these types of guys that just, it takes a long time to learn this position. It could very well happen with Christian Harris. I will say in this case, there is the added context that D'Amico Ryans is probably the best linebacker coach in the NFL. And if he couldn't get to Christian Harris, it's going to be hard to get to Christian Harris. But if anybody else is in the conversation for being a better linebackers coach than D'Amico Ryans, it might be Jeff Ulbrich. So we'll see, right? I'm fascinated. Right now he's listed as a starter. All I know is that when Christian Harris has been on the field, it's been a big problem for the Texans. And I don't think it's a major coincidence that when they really made the decision to pull the plug on the Christian Harris experience, that run defense in Houston just leaped to the ceiling because Christian Harris looks like a free safety that you stuck in the box and asked to defend the run. He's bigger than that in terms of the size, not that much bigger. He's like 220 pounds, but I haven't seen a whole lot of linebackers just get bodied against the run like Christian Harris does. Now, he's flashed in coverage. I don't think he really knows what he's looking for quite yet, but his athleticism is rare. So that's going to translate to certain things like man coverage and the occasional instance where he does see it. Like he had that pick in that playoff game. There's a great clip where D'Amico Ryans is like, I need you to stand here. They're going to throw it right to you and you're going to pick it off. And it happened. So like it can translate to that extent, but he's a total unproven flyer and he might be your starter because Troy Anderson is your next best bet. And that's the dream, is that Troy Anderson gets back healthy and still can get some momentum here. I mean, he has been around here. He was drafted in 2022, and in 4 seasons, he's only played 907 snaps. He wasn't a full-time starter to begin with. He's dealt with injuries, and he missed all of last year after going down in like week 5 of 2020. So he went down week 4, tried to come back, and I don't even remember what the injury was, forgive me. But effectively went down in week 4 of 2024 and didn't play last year and has just been missing in action, right? Well, there's talks that, okay, he's getting healthy and there's a chance this year. And they did bring him back because that rookie contract would have expired after last season. So they're not giving up on him quite yet. The biggest thing that's interesting about him, beyond the fact that he's just 6'4", 235 pounds, he actually gives you some of that size you want here to hopefully replace a Caden Ellis. But the biggest thing is, like, before that injury in 2024, I mean, he played an incredible game in week 4 there against the Saints. I remember breaking this down in last year's deep dive. Like the last full game that he played before this career derailing injury was so clearly something was clicking. The diagnostics, the tackling, the coverage, like, dude, there's something there. You just got to be able to recapture that. And that's just like the classic dream player where there's not a whole lot to stand on here to say, yeah, we're going to get this great year from Troy Anderson. I would be nuts to sit here and rank him too high and say him and Divine Diablo are going to be like this perfect pairing. But there is a world where it happens. So that makes this linebacker room an incredible wild card. And there's upside in a sense with Christian Harris as well. But I'm much more interested in the idea of Troy Anderson getting healthy and that being the outcome. And then they've made some other flyer bets as well in this draft. Kendall Daniels was a safety at Oklahoma, kind of played that star nickel safety role. And he tested really poorly, probably moves a little bit better than he tested. I didn't see a 4th round prospect. I thought he should get drafted as an interesting flyer because he's instinctive and made some fun plays, but I would be stunned if he's ready to play NFL linebacker based on the role that he played at Oklahoma. They also spent a 6th round pick on Harold Perkins, who I actually like better than Kendall Daniels. Perkins is a big name, was a highly recruited guy, was an edge rusher at LSU. I actually really like him here. I don't know that we're going to see too much of it this season. And if we do, it's more as a pass rusher and a blitzer making an impact, not necessarily the run defense and coverage stuff that matters at linebacker. But I will say this about Harold Perkins, and I just hinted at it, but dude, his bend was the best in the class. He has that elite athletic tool. Like, he just can warp around players, the acceleration, the speed, the bend, and he's a tenacious blitzer, and he has like pass rush moves because he started as an edge rusher. So like, in a system that blitzes pretty much more than anybody in the league and got a lot out of that from Caden Ellis last year, if this is a disaster and you're like, okay, Christian Harris can't play, Troy Anderson's hurt, Kendall Daniels isn't ready, Harold Perkins isn't ready either, but we can at least just blitz him and lean on Diablo for the rest of this stuff. There's a path there where he gets on the field and then maybe he does start to get a little better at some of the other stuff. I think the coverage for Harold Perkins, he finally showed this last year at LSU some glimpses of using that speed out in space. The run defense, on the other hand, he just won't be ready to take on blocks, to diagnose things. He's undersized. There's issues there. But I'm actually much more interested in Harold Perkins than I am in Kendall Daniels personally. But we'll see. And then you got J.D. Bertrand. What you see is what you get type of linebacker there, and his lack of movement skills and athleticism have already started to impede his NFL coverage ability. But if everything goes wrong and none of these other guys can play, Bertrand is theoretically NFL linebacker depth that maybe could survive for half a season. But yeah, it's a complete wild card with this linebacker unit. And in this series, as we're looking for proven commodities, this isn't a proven commodity. They rank 29th for me with questions across the board with this linebacker room. But there is definitely upside to be unlocked from Jeff Ulbrich, who is, at his core, an excellent linebackers coach. So there's fascination with this group. I just can't possibly rank this group very high. But let's get to the secondary. Things are a little bit more chill here. They had a good secondary last year, and as we look at the offseason changes, like, really only got better. At cornerback, they do say goodbye to D. Alford, who the Bills, for some reason, gave a decent contract to. Falcons fans are probably laughing at that one a little bit. But they draft Avion Terrell in the 2nd round. Really fun pick. They also signed Darnay Holmes. But with Terrell there coming in, I said upgraded at cornerback. And then at safety, I said neutral. But they did like very sneakily bring in Sidney Brown during a pick swap on day 3 of the draft. So he's here now. But yeah, let's get into the secondary. We can kind of relax. Like, we have a lot of questions about their front 6, but this secondary is in a really good spot. And with the way I've talked about their front 6, you might be like, how the hell is this the 24th ranked team in the NFL? This dude hates their D-line and linebackers. Well, this secondary is awesome, and the secondary allows them to play the style that they do because they're basically going to leave Jesse Bates in the post, and sometimes it's Xavier Watts, but they're going to have a deep safety, and then it's pretty much either man-to-man, or even if it's charted as cover 3, it's like that zone match mentality where you got to pick someone up pretty quickly. So they put a lot of pressure on this secondary, and it was a huge part paired with their coaching that led to them being a very functional pass defense last year. And it should be better this year, like we talked about. So you have AJ Terrell is your number one corner. He is still a really good corner. Hasn't really been necessarily consistent enough or found the ball production to really like reasonably enter like top 8 to even 10 discussions, but I still feel excellent about AJ Terrell. And I don't have a ton of notes on it, honestly. Like he's got everything. He's got size, man, zone ability, misses a few too many tackles for your liking, but that's probably the worst thing you could say about him. Other than like, yeah, he's not unbeatable. Like he has some games where he gets beat just like pretty much every corner does, but he has a lot less of those than most corners in the league. So he is set it and forget it as a CB1, and that's a great starting point. And then CB2 and nickel corner does get a little interesting. There's like, that's why this isn't the best secondary in the league, is you do still have some questions with how this is all going to play out, but you got a lot of options. And right now, early in minicamp, like Avion Terrell is not listed as a starter. I'm going to project that changes here. I'm going to put him up here. I think Avion Terrell is a really good corner prospect. Just he's going to have to earn that starting job. And I think it's probably as a nickel. We'll get to Billy Bowman. He started last year. I don't think he should have been starting last year. I think Avion Terrell can give you everything Falcons fans like about Billy Bowman without the egregious run defense that you get from Billy Bowman. So I'll put Bowman up there on the graphic, and we'll come back to him. But I'm kind of projecting Avion Terrell as the starting nickel corner. And I think that was his best projection because he's hyper quick. He's smart. He still has some to learn in terms of zone coverage. His long speed's just okay, but he'll get sheltered from that in a nickel coverage role. And he's got a little bit of that like Devon Witherspoon, like where he's not that big and strong, but he is just super physical against the run. He's not as good as Devon Witherspoon, but just with his effort and technique and instincts, he's going to give you something against the run. And that's why, I mean, I think he's their best run defending corner. I would stick that in the slot because you could use a little bit of help in run defense, as we've discussed. So I'm anticipating Avion Terrell as the nickel, but he can play outside as well. Some of his height, speed, shortcomings will eventually reduce his ceiling. Like, I don't think he's ever going to be as good as his brother as an outside corner. As a nickel, I think he could be something close, like as one of the better nickel corners in the league. But I think he could be just a nice, solid, kind of almost like Mike Hughes-esque outside corner as well. But big fan of that draft pick, and he gives you flexibility to be inside and out, and really great, like a starting option, but that kind of flexibility is nice. Mike Hughes as well has done a little bit of everything. Like Terrell's just a younger, quicker, probably more instinctive version of Mike Hughes, but it's kind of the same idea where he's probably an outside corner for you. That's where he's played his best ball. But if you need to stick him in the corner because if you need to stick him in the nickel because Billy Bowman's just getting abused, you can do that. Mike Hughes, despite being a first-round bust for the Vikings and bouncing around the league, has reached a contract extension here in Atlanta, and he's an adequate third corner to have, who now gets to likely get slid down that pecking order a little bit, as long as Avion Terrell can be a draft hit for this team. So it's a really nice trio. And then you have Billy Bowman. I'm just not a fan of his game. I think people get excited about him because he's super fast and he's got a sick name and he jumps stuff and like is instinctive and makes some highlight plays happen. The down-to-down consistency is kind of a nightmare for him. As a starting nickel corner, when you already have all of these questions with your run defense, it's just arrogant is the word I keep coming back to. If you're going to have the lightest D-line, tons of questions at linebacker, let Caden Ellis go, let David Onyemata go, and then you have the worst tackling defensive back in the NFL in the nickel, who's also undersized. Okay, at some point, teams are just going to abuse that. he could very well develop with his coverage consistency, get better at his risk assessment, be more of a sticky slot corner, and that's great. But to me, it's like, what are we talking about? Like, it should be Avion Terrell, Mike Hughes, AJ Terrell, and your two starting safeties for a team that basically lives in a base nickel defense. That makes so much more sense to me. So even if Billy Bowman right now is like the nickel corner, give it some time, I would bet against it. And maybe I'm just wrong, and Billy Bowman's awesome, and that's great, but it's certainly not something I'm expecting. So kind of considering him as a corner, but if he gets kicked from the nickel spot, then Billy Bowman might become more like safety depth. And honestly, I like him long-term more as a safety just because the run defense duties are just a lot different. Like, I think he can come from depth and eventually clean stuff up. You just need to be more consistent at everything from the slot. So I've always just kind of questioned what they're doing there with him. But let's go through the rest of the cornerback depth. So you do have Clark Phillips, who's also coming back from injury, kind of wasn't played and then missed the rest of the year. It was kind of confusing with Clark Phillips, but he is more interesting cornerback depth. Someone that I do think can largely, like, he's been more of an outside corner despite being projected as more of a nickel. Really good zone instincts. It's kind of similar to like Avion Terrell and Mike Hughes, where he's not that big, he's not that fast, but he's okay in coverage. That's another option, is Terrell in the slot or Hughes in the slot, Clark Phillips on the outside. I think that's pretty good depth. Darnay Holmes is a slot option. Not an exciting one, but he's bounced around and hung around. I don't think he's an unplayable NFL corner. He's just going to take his losses, and he's not that good of a run defender. You're getting into your deep depth here, but Mike Ford's stuck around as a special teamer. Kobe Bryant was incredibly skinny, but instinctive. They kind of have a type, right? These just quick, instinctive, undersized corners that maybe do have some size restrictions against the run. Surprise, surprise. That's kind of a theme with the Falcons, is size matters not. And then CJ Henderson, I guess, is still getting opportunities. Okay. A lot of names there in that cornerback room. And then you go to your safeties, and Jesse Bates. A couple years ago, I would have banged the drum and said this is the best safety in the NFL. I think he's lost that crown, unfortunately. He's just not been as impactful. He's still a very good coverage player. I still give him a superstar grade, and he's the best player in the secondary for me, but he's probably been passed up in terms of other safeties being more impactful to the game than him. But in this system, I led with it for a reason. Like, they're going to end up in a ton of cover 3, a ton of cover 1, and that's where he thrives. You talk about eye balance and being that last line of defense, a secure tackler that can take risks, convert interception opportunities without busting coverages. Jesse Bates, not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy, not the strongest guy, but God, he's had an incredible career. He does turn 30 this year. We may have seen a little bit of the beginning of the end last year, or it was just a down year. And not that he was bad. He just wasn't what we're accustomed to with Jesse Bates, making plays every other week and defending his crown, to me, is the best safety in the NFL. Still one of the best, though, certainly. And then you have Xavier Watts, who I think eventually is going to you'll just pass the torch to Xavier Watts. It's great that Watts gets to be the number 2 right now. Watts just gets it, dude. Like, you watch enough safeties back to back to back, and you watch Xavier Watts, and it's like, okay, you're not the biggest guy. You don't have blazing speed, but you're just better than most safeties. Like, he's just in the right spot, takes stuff away as it's developing, great ball skills. He's instinctive to find the ball against the run. Sure, the range might not ever be perfect for him, and sometimes he gets out-athleted in space, and sometimes there's games where the missed tackle rate comes up a little bit. Like, there's things you can pick apart with Xavier Watts, but my pro comp on him was Xavier McKinney, and I am not deviating from that path. And I think Xavier Watts, just like Xavier McKinney, may never make the physical impact on a game that makes you go, wow, that's one of the best defensive players in the league. But can he have all-pro production and be a top 7 or 8 safety any given year? I'm going to stand by that on Xavier Watts. It was one breakout year as a rookie. I'm not going to rank him at that level quite yet. But we very well could be in a year or two like, yep, that's a bona fide like superstar safety, one of the better ones in the league, as that torch hopefully gets passed to Jesse Bates or from Jesse Bates. And then kind of like with the cornerbacks, you have some just fascinating been around type of safety depth. Sidney Brown, really a good athlete, short, stocky, speedy dude that is like, if you could put Xavier Watts in Sidney Brown's body, you might have Troy Polamalu. But that's not the case. Like Sidney Brown has all the traits in the world, but has been all over the map in terms of consistency at the position. But they acquired him, and I don't hate him as depth. They have DeMarco Helms, who's a heat seeker, loves to hit. I love having him for your special teams. And I think if he had to start, could give you some splash plays and some fun moments. Darren Hall gets brought back here where he started his career. I don't know, man. Darren Hall always looked decent to me, young in his career for the Falcons, and they just kind of stopped giving him opportunities and let him get phased out. And then when he's gotten little sample sizes of playing time here and there, he's kind of shown the same. So I don't know why nothing stuck with him, but I don't mind bringing him back. And even as a nickel option, I feel like that's just another part of this secondary that could get into the mix somehow. Jamie Robinson was a fan favorite in the draft that's kind of sucked in the NFL. And that's your secondary. I mean, there's a lot of names here. You're pretty insulated for injuries, like as far as NFL depth goes. You've got a ton of names here. Not all these guys are going to make the team, obviously, but the Falcons came out as my 6th ranked overall secondary, 4th to 6th for overall defensive back coverage. The run defense it's just okay. And that's what separates, basically, if you want to be really specific about it, the other two teams that ranked in that 4th to 6th category for DB coverage were better in run defense. So their overall defensive back grade is higher. It's just kind of like a tiebreaker, if you will. But it's a really good unit. And there's not a ton of secondaries that I think really elevate defenses. I think, kind of like I said, when you pair it with a scheme that really understands how to lean on their secondary and how to leverage these guys, I think this is a difference-making secondary and really is a big part of what they're allowed to do here with the Falcons. Now, as we summarize their defense, that's not to say they don't have question marks, right? The Falcons came out as my 28th overall defense, and that would be a step back from what they did last year, for sure. I think they're going to have their hands full repeating a good defensive effort. I do have them 22nd for pass defense, so still top 2/3 of the league, still respectable for pass defense. But I also have them 32nd for run defense. I am quite worried. If you couldn't tell by how I broke this thing down, I am quite worried that a lot of teams are just going to be able to say, hey, that cool blitz package you have with all these athletes on third down, that's great that you have that. It doesn't matter. We're not going to get to third down. We're just going to run the ball for 6 yards a pop. You don't have the strength on this defense, literally, to stop a good run game. And I'm really worried about that. I'll come back to that idea that this is a very arrogant mentality with how they've crafted this defense in a era of football where the run game is making a comeback. 12 personnel is more popular than it's ever been. If I'm facing the Falcons, I would get off the bus and go right at this team and force them to prove that they can slow down the run. And if this team can do that, they can really be in business, because when they get to third downs, they cause some problems with their secondary and their scheme. Maybe some of these pass rushers hit some green lights as well. But to say this is a polarizing defense would be to say the least. They have one thing they're good at and one thing that I really question. Makes them a bit of a matchup dependent defense in that sense as well. But as we start to wrap things up here, let's talk some special teams. And just as they did with the majority of their defense, they mixed up a whole bunch with the special teams. They're changing from two really questionable kickers. I think it was Zane Gonzalez finally stepped in and was pretty good for them after they went through Younghoe Koo and Parker Romo. but they decide to not stick with Zane Gonzalez. They bring in the 42-year-old Nick Folk, who's been awesome these last 2 years. They swap punters as well, going from Bradley Pinion to Jake Bailey. And then a changing in returner as well. Jamal Agnew has been here, and now it's going to be the rookie Zachariah Branch. But I did say slightly upgraded because the kicker situation alone was so bad for a big chunk of last year that's a big upgrade. Now, when we look at my projection for the Falcons special teams, I plug in those objective metrics with a formula, and that's the extent of how we rank these special teams. And they did have some of the worst ranked special teams last year with PFF had them 32nd for their team grade. DVOA had them 29th. That's going to be something to keep an eye on, right? Is they had a bad special teams last year. They got to improve it. Now, they made all the right steps to do that. Nick Folk has been an awesome kicker for the last 2 years, even though he's 42 years old. Does that fall off at any moment? I don't know. But Jake Bailey is a good punter signing. Zachariah Branch should be a really good returner. They did come out 25th for me for special teams. So those improvements with the specialists definitely pick them up from what was one of the worst special teams in the league last year. I think Falcons fans would take 25th in special teams with what they went through last year. But there's definitely a chance that this is one of those worst to first types of special teams where they just push the right buttons and got it straightened out, which is not uncommon for special teams at all. It's hard to predict, and most teams find it fixable unless you're Green Bay. And that is hopefully going to be the case here for Atlanta. But let's summarize all of our thoughts with our handy dandy strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors Venn diagram here. And then I'll get into predictions territory for the Falcons, what I'm actually, I guess if I have to do a gun to my head prediction on what the hell happens with these Falcons this year, I'll do that here in just a minute. But a little recap here. So as we look at their strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors, the Falcons do have something that I would say nobody we've done in this series has yet. And that is like definitive, important strengths that they can really leverage. But some of their weaknesses are stronger than a lot of these recent teams as well. But I would say their run game, essentially everything related to it, from running back, obviously, the run blocking ranked top 10 for me. Still quite optimistic that Kevin Stefanski is going to bring some very good run game coaching to the table here. The only thing really lacking there that we didn't talk too much about is you don't have too much of a quarterback run game impact that some of these elite run games might have. So that's technically lacking. But this was my 7th ranked run game in the NFL. They could finish even better than that. That's a legitimate strength you can hang your hat on. And then on top of that, their weaponry, even if they don't hit every green light, there is a lot to work with there. Enough for me to call it a strength, but it also shows up with the wild cards because you got Kyle Pitts, you got Jahan Dotson's fascinating, Zachariah Branch. Like, if you hit even just 1 or 2 green lights there, weaponry can go from really good to elite and like one of the best groups of pass catchers in the league. And then you're really cooking with gas offensively, obviously. And then even defensively, where I have a lot of questions, you at least have an awesome secondary that you could also argue like pass defense coaching could even show up as a strength for this team too, because that pairs really well, like we've talked about in a blitz-heavy system, really leveraging the idea that we can largely leave these guys one-on-one and build a scheme that takes advantage of that around it. So that's the upside and the exciting side of things for the Falcons. But when you turn your eyes to the weaknesses category, even if this team has bigger strengths than the teams we've talked about, their weaknesses are some of the worst. Honestly, like quarterback is one of my lowest ranked quarterback rooms in the league. We talked about some of the things that could go right, though, with either Tua or Penix, that choose your own adventure narrative with this Falcons team. That's where it shows up in the wild cards. I don't think quarterback's going to be a strength relative to the rest of the league, but can it be good enough that it's not a definitive weakness and just, steer the ship? It's possible. It is more than possible. But defensive line is a major weakness and a potential Achilles heel for this defense. Along with linebacker, it's borderline because Diablo's pretty promising, but they have no LB2 right now. So if they can just find something at LB2, I don't think linebacker will be a weakness for them, but it is obviously a major question. That's less scary to me, though, than D-line and quarterback for sure. But I think a best case scenario here is quarterback is a non-weakness. Defensive line, if Pierce and Walker have a best dream, 5% best case scenario, Pierce doesn't get suspended. They both take big leaps. It's a pretty good edge rush duo. I still have questions about that interior, but maybe it could be good enough that it's not a weakness for the Falcons. And then, linebacker, like I said, is pretty easy to see a path for that to not be a weakness. Well, then we're really in business. That's probably enough with some legitimate strengths to win the NFC South. But what am I predicting here? Let's take a look at their schedule and what I ended up going with for this Falcons team. And honestly, their schedule is not as easy as I thought it would be. We just did the Saints, so we said that with the Saints too. Their schedule's not going to be as easy as it was last year. That applies to the Falcons here. But likewise, you draw the NFC North and the AFC North. Two very strong divisions. The NFC North especially might be the deepest division in the league. I don't see the Falcons being favored in any of those games against the NFC North. And as far as the AFC North opponents are concerned, if I'm in a position like the Falcons are in, I would rather get, say, Cleveland and either Pittsburgh or Cincinnati at home, because those are your more winnable games in that division matchup. Get them at home and have a better chance of winning those games. Well, they got probably the worst case scenario there. They only get Baltimore at home, which they're not going to be favored against Baltimore in week 5. They have to go to Cleveland in cold weather Cleveland, week 14. And then Cincinnati was supposed to be a home game, but they have to play that game in Madrid. And then they don't even have a bye week after that. They have to play the Chiefs at home after that. And week 1, when you've got all these quarterback questions and a, just team in flux right now, you have to go to Pittsburgh. So it's not the easiest schedule. And I actually expected to predict more wins for the Falcons, but when I made these predictions, I go through the whole schedule and come up with how I think things might play out. And I only landed on 5 wins for the Falcons, which is, to me predicting more of a negative perspective, negative prediction on the Falcons. I think there's obviously a chance that they exceed that. And this is an example of a case where my previous team, the Saints, I actually predicted a 6-win season, but I have the Falcons ranked higher. That's why I added this prediction segment, to try to split the difference a little bit more between how I think things actually progress as the season goes down versus the fact that this series is a preseason power ranking. And then as far as win floor and win ceiling, much more of a wide range of outcomes with this Falcons team than a few of these recent deep dives. I think their floor is pretty damn low. They're going to have a great run game and, they should be able to find some wins. But I said 4 wins as a floor just because these quarterbacks, dude, if you end up with some of the worst quarterback play in the league, that's just going to drag you down. And what if James Pierce gets suspended on top of that? I think 4 wins and being a top 3 pick for the Falcons is possible in a worst case scenario. And is that the worst case scenario if you're a Falcons fan? Maybe, maybe not. I think their ceiling is 10 wins, though. I really do. If Tua or Penix can just be the 22nd best quarterback in the league, if you get lucky with the James Pierce suspension, there's still enough opportunities in this schedule, which is still not great, but there's enough opportunity for you to be more of a legitimate playoff team because of some of those key strengths for this Falcons team. So wide range of potential outcomes. I could see it either way. It just kind of depends how optimistic you are, how big of a Falcons optimist and fan are you. Very challenging team to predict. Maybe one of the hardest teams to predict in the league this year. But let's finish with my team superlative awards for this team. For team MVP, it's Bijan Robinson. I do genuinely believe that. I think he's going to be remarkable. I think he's a strong candidate for Offensive Player of the Year if this team doesn't suck. and is going to be the engine of this offense, not just in the run game, but with what he brings to the receiver as well. Biggest wild card, this is a non-quarterback award for me. It's James Pierce Jr., not just with the suspension, which is obviously a huge deal. He's their best pass rusher, but also in terms of like his development. Can he stay on the field and take a big step forward? That would go a long way for this defense so that they don't have to blitz to get after the quarterback every time. For breakout offense, a lot of these offensive players are pretty well established, and I'm not overly optimistic ultimately about either of these quarterbacks. So I went with Matthew Bergeron at left guard, contract year. I like the idea of Stefanski kind of leveraging him as a puller more often. So that's where I landed for breakout offense. Breakout defense, it is Divine Diablo. That linebacker room does rank pretty low right now. There's just so much unproven about it. I do think Divine Diablo can really take that step and be a bordering like top 15 linebacker in the NFL for this year and beyond. Best rookie, Avion Terrell was their first choice, but definitely see a pretty clear path in a very good secondary for him to have a really nice season. I'm not going to go as far as making him like a defensive rookie of the year candidate or anything like that, but this was genuinely one of my favorite defensive draft picks in this entire NFL draft for any team. By the way, just like pairing him with his brother, like that's just incredible. I love the narrative. I kind of buy into that competitive nature between brothers, that this is going to work out and he's going to be a really nice pick for this Falcons team after nailing the Xavier Watts pick as a day 2 pick last year as well, just kind of building up that secondary through the draft. Fantasy MVP, you could argue for Bijan Robinson because Jahmyr Gibbs is actually going 101 and Bijan's going 102. So maybe it's Bijan, but that's, if we're seeking value with this conversation, I don't think it's Bijan. Kyle Pitts might be a popular pick here. He's always a guy that ends up still going decently high, decent option there. But if we're hunting value, this is the lamest pick of all time. I said Tua Tagovailoa, who's right now QB 31. My prediction is that Tua probably starts this season for the Falcons. I'm just not a big Penix believer at this point. I think if you draft him at the last pick of your draft or, very late in a 2 QB draft, we've seen Tua put up some numbers. I think he could probably throw a decent amount of touchdowns in this offense that could have a defense that needs a lot of scoring. I think Tua could easily outplay the QB 31 this year, especially from a fantasy production, right? Not the most exciting choice, but there might be some leagues where I end up with Tua just based on what I'm kind of projecting for this team, or at least trying to predict. But there's your Falcons deep dive, a very fascinating one. Let me know your comments down below. If this is a choose your own adventure book for this season, where do you think this goes? Who starts? Is this team good? Is this team going to suck? Should they pay these quarterbacks if they play well, or is it best that they just do win 4 games and pick high? Really all over the place with this Falcons team. A fascinating one, a fun one to break down. I hope you guys enjoyed the video today. If you did, please do hit that like button. It really helps me out. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of these deep dives coming at you fast and heavy. But until next time, thank you for watching, and we'll talk soon. Cheers.